Thank you. Good evening. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making and audio recording, providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Thank you. Can I welcome Superintendent Gareth Morgan, PCC Crime Commissioner John Campion to the room. You'll be speaking in shortly. Julian, can I have appointments of substitutes, please?
Yes, Chair. We've just got one substitute tonight, and that's Pat Agar. Pat is here for Councillor Bashar Ali.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Mace?
I'm a member of Bike Worcester, which has received funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner.
I'm a member of Bike Worcester, same.
Thank you. And anyone else?
Do I need to declare that I'm the council assignee to the... no, okay.
That's fine. Any other declarations of interest, Councillor Lawrenson?
Yeah, I've just been reminded by a colleague to mention that I work for a registered housing provider, Sanctuary. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrenson. It's fine. And do we have any public participation, Julian? No. Okay. Can we, Councillor Amos?
Thank you. On a point of order, I'm sorry to raise it so early, but if I don't raise it now, it'll be too late, so I wouldn't need to raise it. It's really an item on the agenda. It's item 12, which is obviously exempt on pink paper. My view has always been that everything, if it affects Worcester people, it should be in the public domain so that Worcester people know about what's going on. It says on the agenda that it is exempt because the item contains some matters relating to the financial or business affairs, and that directs us to paragraph 3 of that report. I have that report, obviously, well, we've all got it around the table. There is no information that I can see that relates to the financial or business affairs of Serco, which is the company in question. So I'm confused as to why it is exempt and why it's in private. I mean, it is a highly charged, politically sensitive issue. So my view would definitely be that this should be in the public domain. I'm not quite sure why it isn't.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. I'll take officer's advice first and then I'll get back to you.
Chair, thank you. So the paper we've put together for members it's an emerging policy position from government, not a confirmed policy position. So that information is not in the public domain yet, and given it's a sensitive issue, what we wanted to do is to bring that to members' attention this evening, give them an opportunity to debate, offer an opinion, so we can feed that back to government and to the Home Office in particular, before it becomes a published or a sort of a public decision. But at the moment, because it's something that's not in the public domain, then we feel it needs to be on pink papers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. But if I just follow that very briefly, if I may. I understand what Ms Griffiths is saying, but my point is very specific. The reason given for the exempt is not whether something's in the public domain or not. It says it contains information relating to the financial or business affairs, but that paragraph 3 does not. There's nothing about their business or commercial activities at all. That's my point. I'm not concerned whether something else is in the public domain or not.
Yeah, just help to clarify. The reference to paragraph 3 is a reference to the legislative provisions which require an item to be exempt. It doesn't relate to paragraph 3 of the report. That perhaps is just a little bit of a misnomer. It's paragraph 3, the relevant legislation, which excludes the press and the public.
Okay. In that case, Chair, my question is, remains the same. At what point in the report, whatever paragraph it's in, does it refer to any of the financial or business affairs relating to Serco in any way? Because I can't see any of it. Perhaps if you could direct me to it, then I can leave the point there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Members. We'll just check that out now. I mean, whilst you do that, Lloyd, I mean, the wider question has been raised in terms of actually, could we not discuss the rest of the report and just leave that specific particular item out, or does that particular item that's in closed session affects the whole of the report? So, because a lot of the report is actually information you, general public, would want to find out.
Chair, I know Councillor Amos has wanted to raise this early on to get the answer. I just wonder whether or not could we move through the agenda, and when we come to that item, it will give officers a chance to have gone back through the report and to give it some thought. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I believe we are discussing it in public session as well, item number 8, aren't we? Is that right?
No, the whole of that paper,
The
Chair.
whole of that paper,
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to it, Councillor Amos. Yeah, thank you. Okay, agenda item 4 is minutes of the last meeting. Should we take them on block, or unless somebody has any points? We happy to agree they're a true and accurate reflection? Thank you. Item number 5, presentation from John Campion, West Mercia Police Crime Commissioner. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman. A pleasure to be here with the committee, joined by the Policing Commander for South Worcestershire, Superintendent Morgan. As we discussed earlier, I intend very briefly to run through some slides that I have in relation to commission services, then the Superintendent will give a very brief overview about some of the operational elements, and happy to move to the substantive part, which I'm sure is questions from members. Julian's just going to pop up the slide. So if we go to the first slide for me, please. So the next slide. So in West Mercia, one of my drivers as Commissioner, in addition to my role being the governance for West Mercia Police, is also investing in projects, work and other initiatives in relation to not only supporting victims of crimes, but also to prevent crime, either through true primary prevention or through breaking the cycle of offending, and particularly in relation to young people. This financial year, some £15 million worth of commission spend, and that's an enormous amount of money from where we came from 8 years ago. But I think the also interesting part in West Mercia is a significant amount of that comes from other sources. So we attract a huge amount of money from not only additional Home Office and Ministry of Justice sources, but also wider initiative. And I've worked hard to ensure my team is able to access that funding when it's in the best interest of our community. Any change in government means, whether it be a continuation of the previous government or indeed a brand new government, will embark on a CSR at some point, and indeed there will always be discussions about how they deploy money. I think there is a greater risk in West Mercia if some of those more central pots don't still exist in the future, that will mean that the benefit that we've enjoyed might not be available. And some of that will be on the services that I'm just going to very briefly touch on, because we've had exciting central projects that we know about, such as Safer Streets 5, but also other less known projects, such as tackling the violence against women and girls culture in 20 schools across West Mercia, 2 of which here in Worcester, both at Bishop's Perrone and Christopher Whitehead. Independent sexual violence advisors and independent domestic abuse advisors working in the justice setting to ensure that those are going through that as a victim, but also the criminal justice process, and are having the right support to enable them to do that. But also significant funding outside of our normal core business around perpetrator programs for men. here in West Mercia, we have significantly now, every part of West Mercia, we've got multi-risk domestic abuse perpetrator programmes. So I was very proud in Worcestershire, we were one of the first force areas in the country and the first county in West Mercia to have Drive delivered here in West Mercia, which was for high risk. Now in 2024, we have multi-level perpetrator programmes in every single part of West Mercia. A chunk of that is through the additional funding that we have been able to attract. And at the end of that, I believe it's better outcomes for victims. And so therefore ensuring that we can continue to do that is vitally important for me and for, I think, the people who we serve. Looking to the future, there are 4 main contracts that I'm just in the process of recommissioning. Firstly is the Multi-Crime Victims Service, so the catch-all, as it were, those very central resource that sees the vast majority of crimes, currently calls the Victim Advice Line. I have a political pledge to see a Victims Hub delivered, and that will be part of that recommissioning. The ISFAs, so those independent sexual violence advocates, we will be recommissioning that and ensuring that we get the right level of support through our criminal justice partners to ensure that that is as joined up as it can be to support those through what is an incredibly long process through the criminal justice system. Child Criminal Exploitation Service, so some of you may have heard of CLIME, so that is a service that we were able to launch just as COVID started, but since COVID been able to expand to include under 10s, and I was here earlier in the week seeing that service delivered right in the heart of this county. Some further work around the Child Sexual Exploitation Service and indeed a diversionary service that hopefully you will have heard of around Steer Clear. So I do see a significant amount of resource locally that I divert to those services, and we will recommission them. But as I say, incredibly important that we see that central funding continue. We can move to the next slide, Julian. So Worcester City, I always think it's important. So sometimes you hear about West Mercia. Well, okay, West Mercia is great, but what about here in the city? These are just some examples of some of the pots of money that I make available and then draws obviously through the activity as a result. Community safety partnerships have been around for a long time. Even I can't claim to have invented them, but they're a really great vehicle for getting activity about preventing crime and disorder completed in the community. I know you collaborate with other districts in the delivery of, but I'm proud to provide funding for the CSPs and indeed then use that as a vehicle where necessary to augment that activity. And one of them is the Safer Communities projects that we've run in Worcestershire. So first of all, there is the Worcestershire element on there, the £2 million, that's primarily with the Upper Tier Authority, but also there is a share of money that I allocated to the districts to do that more grassroots, community-based crime prevention, cohesion type work. And I know the districts here in South Worcestershire have passported that money to the CSP to oversee the delivery of. I'm a huge believer that by augmenting existing activity, we will see greater outcome. I also recognise that small pots of money help make things happen, and the superintendent has access to a small community fund to which they are able then to direct funding to support small projects, whether it be vehicle activated signs or other support for different community activity. And the very last one before I hand over to the superintendent was about the serious violence duty. It's a really interesting bit of legislation for those that have had a look at it, and indeed comes with lots of duties and obligations, and the government have passported some money through to enable us to progress it in the way I think that the legislation was intended. We have made sure that that is allocated appropriately and working with the CSP partners, to which of course the City Council is one, to make sure that it is progressed. I would say to you, I've had to see a little bit more of a force-led approach to the serious violence duty at the moment, but my aspiration is working with partners. It stops being that police-led duty, because we are truly going to tackle serious violence in our community. It will come, I think, from other sectors of public service or indeed from the community itself. £15 million worth of services, so a mere snapshot of what we do, and if there are others either in the questions or if we interact outside of this meeting, I'll happily support members to understand how that is spent. But Superintendent, did you just want to touch on the operational issues?
I do. Thank you, PC. Good evening, councillors. My name is Superintendent Gareth Morgan. As I said, I am the Policing Commander for South Worcestershire, so that includes Worcester City, Wychavon and Malvern Hills districts. I'm not new to the policing area. I was a Chief Inspector here a number of years ago on one of the local policing teams. So it's very good for me to come back, and I feel as though I haven't left. South Worcestershire, as I said, I'm the new Policing Commander, and I've got 3 priorities for me. Those are community engagement, those are increasing our response to domestic abuse, as we know that increased confidence in reporting. We've already seen so far year to date the increased number of reports of domestic abuse by 5% within South Worcestershire, and we believe that's hopefully attributed to greater confidence in coming to the police and reporting of the issues, and also in regards to victims of crime and supporting those victims of crime, increasing our confidence in policing. As you know, or may not know, the Safe Neighbourhood teams are the heart of the community, are our reach into the communities to understand what your priorities are and how best we can support you in that activity. I'm happy to say, and I'm very pleased to say, that our SNT teams will very soon be up to full strength in all of the areas, which hasn't been seen in some time. There's been a very big focus, not only from the PCC's office, but from Chief Officers, to ensure there's a red line and ring fenced around those SNT resources. With regards to that, I hope to see increased engagement with you all and those amongst your communities in order to understand what those priorities are and focus our resources, not only those within South Worcestershire, but also those force resources to come and support yourselves. Just a number of things from me. We did talk around the domestic abuse and the violence against women and girls. We have a dedicated officer within my team at South Worcestershire that helps to support diversionary pathways, helps to support those civil orders, and as such in South Worcestershire we have a 93% conversion rate at court from DVPNs to DVPOs, which is the largest in the West Mercia Police Force, and that is from the fantastic work that that officer is doing and the training that she's given to the officers in order to they are committing that correct service when they go out to these domestic abuse victims and looking beyond those obvious and making positive action. I have a dedicated burglary team. As we know, burglary, especially that within the dwelling, has a significant impact on families, and from people and that I've known in the past, their lives have been turned upside down when they've been a victim of it. We have a dedicated team, and we've seen a 38% reduction in burglaries within South Worcestershire, which is fantastic, testament to the tenacity of that team in going after those offenders, identifying them and bringing them to justice. With regards to shoplifting and retail crime, you may have seen recently around the national priorities with regards to that. That's no different to here in West Mercia, and we have some town centre teams and also some hotspot policing areas, of which we have 14 within the South Worcester policing area to focus activity and be visible. Finally, I am also looking to rewrite, or the force is looking to rewrite with the PCC office, the local policing charter, in order to reframe our commitment and our support to yourselves and the communities. And I'll be reaching out to a number of you, I'm sure, within the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, John. I'll open it up to the floor then, please. Do we have any questions for... Take Councillor Amos first.
Thank you, Chair. John, Inspector Morgan, thank you very much for coming along. I always ask this question, so you might have already got the answer. It's community policing. What bothers my constituents, and I'm sure it's the same throughout the city and throughout the whole West Mercia area, it's not the fear of being murdered, it's what I call low-level crime. They're the things that people talk to me about, and they say, where are the police? We don't see them. So, I mean, this is nothing new, but it does seem to me that the way society is going as well, people want to see, they actually want to see politicians out as well. They want to see the police out. I get very much the feeling that community policing, I found in Worcester, is very, very successful But it does depend on one thing, which is the police officers and community support officers being in post long enough to get to know the area and the issues and the people. And by that, I mean the troublemakers as well. When I represented Warndon, for example, the officer there was marvellous. He knew all the troublemakers. And when there was an incident, he was very effective at dealing with them. But he was there for some time and he built up this knowledge. Similarly, it happens in my area of Bedwardine and Lower Wick and Pitt Marston. So really my question to you is, I can understand you would want to move on officers if they're doing well, move them up. But how do you square that with the essential thing that for community policing to be successful, people have got to build up this body of knowledge. They've got to get to know people. That's how you get the information, and that's how you get the public reassurance, because they simply see the same police officer and they feel comfortable to report things and to say things. I know it's not easy, but that's what my constituents tell me all the time. They don't talk to me about murders. They're talking about this low-level crime and what are the police doing about it. Then I contact one of my local police officers and ask them, and then tell them.
So I'm sure, Chairman, the Superintendent might have a view, but the view from myself as the elected representative is I wholly agree with Councillor Amos. I've worked very hard to ensure the force has record number of police officers in terms of 10% more than we, just under 10% more than we had in 2010. But that doesn't make a difference to anybody, doesn't it, if it doesn't feel like that? And so therefore driving that visibility and accessibility is really important. And all the measuring I do as Commissioner is while crime is going down, people reporting seeing a police officer regularly, or PCSO, is also going down. And so we need to make sure that enough of the resource are doing that, and has had a significant not only focus of resource from myself into safer neighbourhood teams, but also scrutiny in terms of how they are used, because the Chief Constable quite rightly has operational independence, and so therefore how they deploy their resources and use them operationally is independent. But I think it is clear that there is enough resource in the system to make that community policing, that safer neighbourhood activity consistent and stable, but it's how then I work with a substantive Chief Constable to ensure that happens over the longer period. Because I hear, like Councillor Amos does, in communities where there is a long-standing embedded community team, the benefits are absolutely felt. So making sure more of our community consistently feel that is a priority from the second. But I don't know if the Superintendent wanted to comment as to how we improve longevity of postings out to some of our community police bases.
Thank you, Mr. Campion. Just drawing on the point there has been an uplift recently in police officers, specifically with regard to neighbourhood teams and those teams that support them. Under Mr. Campion, they've introduced the neighbourhood crime fighting teams, so they are able to focus and flex on those local priorities that you may have. You're absolutely right with regards to, so the one issue is getting the staff in, which we're getting there. Very much so. Only one vacancy now in South Worcestershire, which is absolutely fantastic. It's then that consistency that you've alluded to, and that ability to then understand and build those relationships. For me, there's a lot of work ongoing in the force at the moment with regards to treating our SNOs as probably a specialism. So you go in there because you want to. A lot of people go into firearms. They don't leave firearms roads policing. They don't leave roads policing. And we want to pull back, as you would have had when you were younger and I've had younger, that neighbourhood feel and that ownership and being that sheriff, so to speak, of that particular area. And I think with that, it's showing and supporting those officers and staff with additional training and expertise to make them feel as though there's a real specialism and that's where they want to stay and belong. Yeah. The force has moved into an operational position whereby we're seeing the reduction of abstraction of our S&T officers. So if we've got our patrol officers and the numbers are low, the S&T officers aren't the first ones that they come to because they're pulling them away from those areas. And then from that, we've got a lot of scrutiny around those abstractions, not only at a local but also force level, to make sure that they aren't being abstracted. For me, it's very much that visibility piece I said before, that engagement and my priority. And we've really started to hone in on individual teams and individual within those teams to make sure that they are out and about and they are producing what we need them to do and they are engaging, and to demonstrate that they are not only to be overly intrusive, but to ensure that they're doing what's right for the members of the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Wilmore, Lamb, DeSera, Mason and Kimberley. And Councillor Lawrenson, can I ask if you can keep your questions quite concise, please?
Thank you. I would just like to acknowledge our local Batten Hall and Nunnery Safer Neighbourhood team, who have been incredibly visible, responsive and a real presence in our community. So PC Kelvin James, Phoebe Atwood and PCSOs Danny Savage and Sarah Hughes. If there are appraisals coming up anytime soon, then strong endorsement, 5-star would use again from us. My question really is, following the publication of the Casey report, which found institutionalised misogyny within the Met, the previous Chief Constable acknowledged that that was a problem also within West Mercia. So, given that most misogynists don't publicly advertise it, and that the Casey report found that those officers were known to be misogynist, homophobic, racist by their colleagues, how confident are you, and what's that confidence based on, that when the people of Worcester need a police officer, they're not going to encounter a misogynistic, racist or homophobic one?
So I think the question is an excellent one, and one around us as a society's responsibility, because misogyny, racism, homophobia are in society, and unfortunately they are in policing as a result. And so having a process to recruit people that don't necessarily have them in is quite a hard task, isn't it? So if we get those people in the organisation, how they are rooted out. And the progress and how, and your central question, how I'll know that there is progress being made, one of those, I think, litmus tests is how the organisation reacts to it happening. In the not too distant past, I think some of the behaviours you talked about would be ignored, laughed about or laughed off. Whereas now we see more and more cases of the organisation, so police officers and staff witnessing or being aware of that and calling out that behaviour now. As Commissioner, I get formed of every major incident involving a discipline matter with the staff, and I get complete oversight and knowledge of all of the discipline matters. And so therefore that transparency helps me also to look at that. And I very carefully and closely monitor it. What I would say to you is West Mercia has had some significant cases that are incredibly unpleasant, including rape and other behaviours which are abhorrent in society, let alone a trusted role that is a police officer, and we will see some more of them. But I know that we have been successful in our mission is the swiftness to which those are detected with those traits are ejected from the police service. There is a strapline in West Mercia, not in my service. And I think that is the way that we will win this, is through the hearts and minds of the staff and officers, making sure that they are the force's own policemen to make sure that it is called out and indeed driven out.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. Start with a comment to echo what Councillor Amos has just said. Actually, obviously, I represent Dines Green, and we're lucky to have a dedicated police post in the ward, which is really important in sort of building those relationships with local people. And I think last time the Police and Crime Commissioner was here last year, I was seeking reassurance that that police post would be maintained and retained, and it has been, which is great. But we also have this sort of high turnover of staff. We had Paul Slaymaker for many years, who was absolutely brilliant. He was replaced by Sean Haynes, who again was a very experienced officer, but then he's moved on. And obviously, that high turnover, for exactly the reasons that Councillor Amos has said, there is the inability of them to make those links with the local community, because a lot of effective policing is very much those soft skills. It is about building community links and finding out what the local community knows and who are the sort of perpetrators of crime sometimes. So I also want that reassurance that something's going to be done about the retention of talented officers. The other thing I was really glad to see is I've got feet in two areas really, because I'm obviously a councillor in Worcester, which is West Mercia, and I work in Sandwell in West Brom, which is part of obviously the West Midlands. And, you know, it's really good to see the emphasis on the Steer Clear programme about knife crime, because, you know, I work in an area of deprivation where young people carry knives as a habit. And literally the day before we returned after the Easter holidays, I was phoned up at midnight as principal and by someone from the West Midlands Police Force to say that a young person had been stabbed to death literally outside the college, and the next morning when students came in they had to go in through side entrances because there was a blue tent outside the front of the college. So I think, you know, dealing with crime, knife crime particularly, is really, really important. I suppose my question is, you know, how widespread is this issue in Worcester? How will we know whether we are achieving some kind of success? And what kind of good practice are we learning from our colleagues in West Midlands? Because obviously crime is an issue that doesn't follow boundaries. You know, there are artificial boundaries between West Mercia and West Midlands. And, you know, it's a similar, I suppose another question is about county lines, because county lines is an issue where, you know, they might start in Birmingham and then they come down the railway lines into Worcester. And so what cooperation is there between you as Police Crime Commissioner here in West Mercia and your colleagues in West Midlands, because these two areas are very closely linked?
So you'll be pleased to know we work closely together on a whole raft of issues, but let's also be clear, the central point that you make is spot on, that crime doesn't respect forced borders, but the level of criminality and serious violence in the West Midlands is a disgrace, and indeed has been high for a very long period of time. And it's not necessarily a political comment, because it's been the same under a Labour government as it has under a Conservative government. But the crime in our inner city areas disproportionately affects, I would suggest, communities like Worcestershire, and the rise of knife-related violence and like in the West Midlands really worries me here, because our figures are low, and we will work, as I mentioned before, about, you know, I saw some Steer Clear and Climb work delivered this week. That is with residents who live in West Mercia, whereas actually we know that actually we might need to be more fearful about what is coming across our borders. So having good, proactive, visible policing that is in our community is vitally important. We've heard from the first area of question, but it's also there around deterrent. So therefore, police officers at train stations, at our busy points, so that people know that the police are present and indeed will intervene. It's not been touched on yet, but I'm sure it will at some point, so it's good to touch on it now. There is a antisocial behaviour hotspotting project within West Mercia at the moment, and the one in the centre of Worcester is outside the Worcester Cross, where in effect a police officer will be present for a period between 15 or 18 minutes on a regular basis. It's recorded on an app, etc., because it's about driving down antisocial behaviour. But I believe it's much wider than that, because those, when they see the uniform and the authority that it represents, will start to think about their behaviours. Because one of your questions, Councillor Lamb, was how prevalent are knives? I don't know. I can tell you the figures of those that we detect, but I would suggest to you they're wildly wrong. And that prospect of that young person carrying a knife, seeing a uniform, or knowing that they might get caught and held accountable for it, and changing their behaviour, I absolutely think is one of the benefits of driving more and more police visibility in our society.
Thank you. Councillor Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make a comment, first of all, about the S&T station in Warndon. They moved about a year ago to premises around the back of where they used to be, and it used to be a shop front and people could come in. They've moved around the corner in a way that people still don't know they're there, I would say. And when you visit them, there is no counter. You have to ring a bell, and eventually someone comes out, and they have to physically manhandle the doors, 2 sets of doors, to get to you. So I was just wondering whether something could be done, not necessarily a big job, but to make it more welcoming and accessible to the local community than it currently is. It's also, as far as I can see, never been washed. So it's filthy on the top, the awning, you know. So, small points in a way, but if you want the community to engage and to, you know, be dealing with the police in the way you seek, I think that would help. So I felt a little bit more engaged. I particularly wanted to ask about drug dealing, because it is a big problem in my ward. Residents report regularly with intelligence to the local SNT. They feel as if nothing happens as a result. Now, I know that that is probably something you hear a lot because, you know, things have to progress slowly in the background and maybe things are happening. I was just wondering why it is that known drug dealers, everybody knows that this is happening. I don't really understand the blockers to them being taken off the streets. And one final point, sorry. I did notice in a report recently that CCTV, it operates quite a number of places around the city, and the City Council pays for it. I was wondering why that was the case, because most of what is recorded goes straight to West Mercia Police for prosecutions. There's very little of what's recorded doesn't get used for that reason, and I believe it used to be funded by the police. And I was wondering, you know, whether that could be brought back, sent back to you, and take some pressure off our budget. Thank you.
So I'll pick up the first question, the last question, and the superintendent, I'm sure, will pick up the drugs question. So disappointed here around the cleanliness of the police base and your observations around access. I will have those picked up by the estates team. I'm quite pleased about the move in Cranham Road, if I'm honest, but in terms of the accommodation, I don't know if you ever went inside, particularly unpleasant, especially around welfare for the officers that were based there. The prospect of a shop is a good one. I like the shop front bit, but the reality for officers wasn't great. So therefore, the base just around the corner, really good. But I'll see what can be done in it. Well, we can definitely do some cleaning, but in relation to the access you describe. Lastly, about CCTV, I'm probably going to be less accommodating because the legislation I referred to earlier, there is obligations on the City Council to contribute towards that crime and harm reduction as well. So I don't own any CCTV other than on our police sites. The City Council or the relevant local authority does, so therefore it is incumbent on them operating it. Now, I recognise it's not as black and white as that, so myself and predecessors have supplied a significant amount of capital resource going into the equipment to which Worcester City has also benefited. And some of that investment is also about reducing the running costs. So whilst I'm not able to assist in your passporting of the City Council's cost, hopefully I have shown partnership investment towards the problem, because in the same way the City Council has pressure on its finances, you'll be pleased to know it's no different in the world of policing. But in relation to drugs, Superintendent?
Thank you. First of all, for me, it's positive that you've got a community that are willing to engage and report matters. That shows some confidence, and as a result, we need to ensure that we're giving something back. There's been some fantastic work that's gone on, especially within Warndon itself. We've recently had an operation called Operation Warnfront, where we saw a number of raised warrants, shall I say, sorry, on the back of intelligence provided by the community. We also have had recently some activity with regards to, they're called the Fourth Gang, which was operating within Worcestershire. We've had some dedicated arrests and some CBOs served on a number of those gang members, and we've seen a significant reduction in crime. That's not to say, and as you may know, and you may have heard it before, that when you cut the head off a snake, another one grows back. And what we need to do is ensure that we're keeping that pressure on. I think one way we can help support and provide something back to the community is really highlighting the good work that's going on, and a big thank you. And that goes back to that engagement piece that I said earlier. So you've reported back into us. Thank you very much. We've gone off, we've developed the intelligence, we've gone and got a warrant from the Magistrates Court, we've gone and done this work, we've locked them up, we've taken them to court, and they've got whichever sentence the courts deem suitable, but we haven't told you about it. So it may be going on just down the road, down a couple of blocks away, but you haven't seen that activity, it hasn't come back to you. And thereby, where's your trust and your faith in the police that's not being restored there, because you're thinking every time I tell them nothing's happening. Believe me, it is, and we want your residents to keep telling us. What we need to do is tell you what we're doing about it, and I can assure you we will.
Thank you. Councillor Mace.
Thank you. I had 3 areas I was going to cover, but in the interest of time, I will just concentrate on one and email the other two over. So thank you for the extensive and detailed report on the funding initiatives, and in particular for the funding for Bike Worcester and for the parking buddies at St George's CE in my ward that the Safer Neighbourhood team and Councillor Lawrenson paid for. I'm also glad to hear about the funding at Bishop Perrone, as my eldest will be attending in the autumn. And I'm also very grateful for the time officers supported the bike buses at my son's primary school as well. The thing I wanted to raise is Operation Snap. So West Mercia has, until very recently, been an excellent example of a force implementing Operation Snap. There's been a very fast turnaround of submissions. Action has been taken in lots of appropriate cases, you know, with drivers being sent on awareness courses or given notice of intended prosecutions, where they're not passing in a safe manner or having things like using mobile phones or parking at pedestrian crossings. However, something has changed in the last few months. I know other members of Bike Worcester previously had submitted 100 videos in a row and been resulting in action being taken against the drivers. But recently, the things that used to get action taken are no longer having action taken up, they're just getting warning letters. And the explanation that we've been given is that there needs to be aggravating factors. So it's not just because the Highway Code says drivers should pass at 1.5 metres. If they're not passing at 1.5 metres, but another driver is not made to swerve out the way or slow down, or the cyclist doesn't wobble as a result, then it's okay and they can just have a warning letter, which to me seems backwards. If a driver comes past me and I'm on my bike, as I often am, I cycled here today, and they pass me at 1.5 metres, fine, that's great. But if they don't pass me at 1.5 metres and there's nothing coming the other way, why did they pass so closely? So that's, to me, a clear factor of driving without due care and attention. Yeah, and from the explanation we have from the officers dealing with Operation Snap now, they are saying basically that if a car passes me or any other cyclist much too close, and there's a car coming the other way, but they pass me close enough that they don't inconvenience the other driver, then that's okay. Whereas to me, that's completely backwards. The question is whether the overtake is appropriate and safe in the circumstances. Is the space being left when there's nothing coming, or is the space being left when there's something coming the other way? So I would like that reviewed if possible. I'm just wondering if there's any improvements you can make in that area, please.
Just before you answer that, PCC, I think a follow-up question, no doubt, people may be thinking is about cycling on pavements and enforcement of that.
So I'll let the superintendent touch on cycling on pavement. But in relation to SNAP, disappointed to hear your perception of the change in outcome, but I'm very proud of SNAP and the progress that it's made. I think it may be, and I hear from your question that you're engaged with some of the operational officers, but I think it may be worth us having a wider conversation outside of here to understand what that might be, because I do fall into the category of the laws are upheld in our country by a police officer who sees something and using their personal judgment, and then if it goes to a prosecutory route, the prosecutor judging, and then the person in judgment. So I do have to have trust in those that see what they see to use their power, but it does sound like there's been a shift in something there. So happily have a conversation outside of here and understand how we raise that appropriately, because I think we've seen a real revolution in our society about how we treat cyclists. I'm not unusual, but I ride a pedal bike, I can ride a motorcycle, I can drive a car, I can drive a lorry, and so therefore I do see lots of different perspectives, and I had thought in recent times that there had been a slight improvement in experience, but if you're not seeing the same in your perception from the enforcement authority that is the police, I think it's worthy of a wider conversation. The thorniest subject of pedal cyclists on pavement, Superintendent?
New legislation, as you may not know, has come out recently, covering a whole range of offences, because we have seen people that have been unfortunately hit by those cycling on the pavements, and some people killed. For me, it's about that reinforcement, perhaps to my teams, which I can take away with regards to either those perceptions, but they're real or not, with regards to activity on that, in that if they do witness people cycling on the pavement, there are offences to be there, and they need to deal with that in a proportionate manner. I think that's, I wasn't aware of that as an issue. It's one that I can take up. When we talk around cyclists on the road, new changes to the highway code with the hierarchy of road user. And I think as a country, we're probably adjusting to that, but notwithstanding the points that the Commissioner has made around that switch.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Kimberley, Councillor Lawrence, and then Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. For full disclosure, I'm not a member of the committee, but when I heard that Mr. Campion was coming to speak with us, I felt I absolutely had to get in on this. So I'm not here as an intruder. I was allowed to join in. I wanted to ask particularly, building on a point made by my colleague Jill, we represent in Warmdon and Derby Park, and we have an area which is disproportionately, we have a large minority community and a patchwork of different groups who live in a couple of our particular corners of the ward. And it's been our experience so far that these areas have been disproportionately affected by crime in various ways. One of the big concerns that I've got after a month or two of really getting to know them and getting to understand the problem is there are quite a lot of barriers between the communities, particularly the non-English speaking communities, the people who don't speak English as a first language rather, and actually accessing police services. A lot of them, if they don't speak English as a first language and they're being asked to put in reports to the police in written form, and a lot of the systems seem to be geared towards that, it is significantly more difficult for them to do so. And again, my experience has been that the things that get followed up on are the ones where someone can chase up a couple of times, which excludes groups like that. So I was going to ask you what steps West Mercia is committed to taking to improve equality of access for all different communities in our city to access policing services. Thank you.
Thank you. So with regards to identifying those hard-to-reach communities and ensuring that we know where they are and how we're engaging with them, that has been a focus that I've set my SNT inspectors recently. If I'm honest, when I asked the question on what does our community look like, the knowledge is probably better in some areas than others, and as such I've set them a very clear task to understand that a little bit more. With regards to the reporting of that, when officers come across a situation, they do have ways and means to utilise things such as language line in order to facilitate that communication whilst they're there and then, and hopefully obtain the details and deal with the matter appropriately. I'm confident that most of the officers understand how to utilise that service. It's used all the time in the police stations and the custody blocks, but now officers can use that with their mobile phones out on the streets in order to facilitate those communications. So for me, and hopefully a reassurance to you that I'm looking to develop what that picture looks like and also work with yourself and those members of the community to try and enhance what we do in our interactions with yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a sort of, I think the CNT are brilliant. My local CNT, Brahim, I was talking to in the car park of the Co-op on Ormsley Road, but I don't really recognise the others. So could we do something so my residents can recognise their police officers? So there is a team that they can deal with. That's my one question. My other one is much more boring, but it's very important to my residents, is speeding. They come down the Northern Link, they come down the Ombersley Road as if they are still on the on the Northern Link. They turn into Claines Lane, which is a very narrow lane, and then they come down Corn Meadow, like they are at Brands Hatch. And there's a chicane, and they seem to love cushioning off the corners. That road is supposed to be a 30. It's supposed to be a 30 from the roundabout, and the other one is supposed to be a 30 from Green Lane. Can we have more visible reinforcement of that, particularly if there's been roadworks? I've had reports of people mounting the pavement to go round the roadworks rather than wait. And actually, I had a local resident standing on the pavement arguing with so who would they speak to as well? they see speeding like that or behaviour like that, who do they approach? Thank you.
With regards to your first matter, the online presence, I will get that resolved. It should be updated. That there is no excuse for it. Raheem, excellent officer, and is very visible within the community. I know that because I live in that community as well. With regards to the Ombersley Road, and especially those issues there around Cormeadow Lane and that visible presence and reassurance, you'll see, or you will have seen recently, the speed sign, the spin up there. I think that's had a bit of a positive impact on speeding, as I have come down there, not to say that everybody sticks to it, and as you've alluded to, when there's roadworks and the frustrations that people do see that they do move around. For me, everyone should know who their local policing officer is, and everybody should be able to report those issues and those issues acted on. So for me, if we go back to your first point with regards to that online presence, what does that look like? How do they understand who they are and get in contact? I need to ensure that's done, and that information that's coming into them is then acted on appropriately. And on behalf of your communities, if you're not getting that, please come back to me directly and I'll resolve it.
Thank you. Councillor Agar, I believe, is the last speaker.
Thank you, Chair. Well, welcome back, Superintendent. Good to see you. And good to see you also, John. No discrimination between the two of you. 2 or 3 issues, really. One was that the fact that Councillor Amos has mentioned churn of personnel in local neighbourhood teams is an issue because they're just getting to know the patch and they move on. So there needs to be something done about that. And I think in relation to that, perhaps raising the police profile, not just online, but in our community centres and you know, centres that people go to in our areas would be helpful, such as posters with names and maybe photos of who they are and how to get hold of them and so forth would help. To do them justice, they've been very good with us. We have them coming to our drop-in in August. So we'll have a chat to them about that. We do have a very experienced CSO who knows the patch well, and she's been invaluable in that respect, but we have had this churn. It is an issue, no question. The other thing, when I was running a women's centre, there used to be, and I don't know if there still is, I'm interested to know, a domestic abuse unit who had particular designated training on domestic abuse and were extremely good, actually. I couldn't really send very young staff into some places where I knew this was happening, but I could actually walk in myself with an officer in plain clothes, usually a woman, and that used to work quite well in gaining trust. Do you still have a unit like that, or is the training more general across the force? I'm not sure how this works these days. And the other thing is, we've talked a lot about prevention of antisocial behaviour and all the rest of it, and young people hanging around or speeding on mini motos or whatever it is the issue is. And one of the problems is we just don't have a youth service worth the name anymore. You know, there's not very much for them to do, especially in somewhere like Rongsford, where they can't afford to sort of pay to go to places often. And I think actually a lot more youth work would be a big help.
So I concur about stability, and it's been talked about along tonight. I happened to see the Chief Constable today in my weekly meeting, and one of the things we've talked about regularly is the PCSO vacancies we've got across the force. Now, actually, it's not that bad in South Worcestershire compared to some of the other areas, but by the end of the year, we will have no vacancies with PCSOs. In fact, we're over-recruiting slightly so that the churn will come, because I also know that they statistically stay longer than in post. And so that's a really key, important part for me. In relation to, and I'll let the superintendent touch on his arrangements in South Worcestershire, but the central drive has been that more and more of the organisation in West Mercia Police, the whole 5,000 individuals, have got knowledge and understanding around DA, its impact, etc. And so there has been a much wider training delivered over a number of years to ensure that there is a much greater understanding across the piece. But in relation to particular local arrangements, Superintendent?
We do have a dedicated team. They are our PVP, Protecting Vulnerable People team, and and they deal specifically with regards to domestic abuse and serious sexual offences. And just building on the Commissioner's point, my role before this was I was the head of our Learning and Development Department for the Force. And I said the domestic abuse and the response to domestic abuse is everyone's responsibility. And as such, DA training has been provided to every frontline officer. Not only that, there's been additional training with regards to looking beyond the obvious. So when they go there to an address, also as we've seen, unfortunately, with the Alfie Steele case recently about that, looking beyond the obvious and supporting those children and ensuring that those inroads are made. Earlier I described our use of civil orders on South Worcestershire. We have the highest conversion rate, which I think is a positive with regards to those civil orders. We give out where it's necessary those to the perpetrators in order, not only on top of charges and any bail conditions, but also as an additional remedy to hopefully protect a vulnerable person. We also have on South Worcestershire dedicated domestic abuse officers, or called DARA officers, if you've ever heard of that term. So there is a very big focus within South Worcestershire on vulnerability, protecting those most vulnerable within the communities, but also that it's the message is it's everybody's problem, not just those within those specialist departments.
I'm not sure you're getting as much help as you might from our medical and health services in reporting domestic abuse.
No, well, I will say we do work hard with partners. Do we get it right all the time? No. Do we bring them along at the pace that we potentially move and everything that we have? Possibly not. However, that there is that partnership working. There is that that close working relationship and building those relationships with them to ensure that they feel that they're competent and they've got that training and that support to provide.
And one of the other great developments in the IDVA world over time is that actually there are now IDVAs working embedded in accident emergency, for example. So we are seeing and so obviously one person, lots of issues, but it's not just that, it's how then they're building that system response to the issue.
Thank you. Councillor Amos is the last speaker, and then I'll sum up, if that's okay. I've got
Yes,
some
thank you, Chair. I will be brief. It's just really to follow up something that you said about cycling on pavements. And if I heard Superintendent Morgan correctly, I think he said he was surprised that was a problem. If to allay his surprise, I suggest he reads the Worcester News or gives me a ring every week, and I can give him some examples of why and how it's a problem. But in all seriousness, Chair, it is a problem, and I don't think it's taken seriously. We won't go into the ins and outs of everything, but the fact of the matter is, the city centre in particular is a pedestrianised zone. It's not even just an ordinary pavement, it's a pedestrianised zone. It's covered by TROs. There are signs up on every entrance and exit to say what the hours are for legal cycling and vehicles going in there. And I'm afraid, because it is a, well, I'm afraid, it's a fact. It is a criminal offence. And I'm getting increasingly concerned and frustrated, as people are, because they keep coming to me. They think I'm the only person bothered about it, so I get all the complaints. But it is a problem, frankly, Chair, that needs to be addressed, because people should not be cycling in a pedestrianised zone. There are elderly people out there. There are people with children. They run around. They don't expect to see behind some brain-dead moron on a bike cycling through in danger of knocking people over. And it's going to happen. And I really think we need to take this more seriously. So I'm very grateful, Chair, you raised and gave me the opportunity to ask Superintendent Morgan for his comments.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Amos. I mean, in the interest of fairness, of obviously trying to get everybody's points across in there. There is an alternative view regarding that PSPO and what other people's view are in terms of our transport plans are and our objectives of encouraging cycling. So there is an alternative view around that, which needs to be heard as well. Councillor Morgan, sorry, Superintendent Morgan.
We've been through the response around cycling, but what I would say, and it's a more general point, is around policing isn't the catch-all of everything in society. 10,000 calls for service to West Mercia Police every week, and there are 2,500 officers, supported by roughly 5,000 in total. I, as Commissioner, on behalf of the public, will always make sure the focus is on proportionately responding. We've talked a lot about community issues tonight that are really important to me, but also the huge harm that's caused in our society also needs the vast majority of the police resources. So I do get at times it doesn't always feel like as much weight would go on some of the community issues, but my drive as Commissioner is to make sure there is a proportionate response to all those issues, including those that don't want to cycle appropriately and putting others in danger.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions before we finish. If Councillor Campion, sorry, John. And I mean, in summary, I mean, just feeling the mood in the room. I mean, I get just and picking up on public opinion. I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that trust in the police is at an all-time low, especially in terms of sexual crimes and violence. Whether it's a woman walking through the high street or an area having her hijab pulled off, or somebody late at night walking through the street thinking, am I going to be safe or not? Although you mentioned the police, in your police force you have a motto around not in my force, these women and young girls will be thinking when they see a police officer, is it a friend or a foe? How do you respond to that? How do you restore that confidence in policing, in serving the residents of this city and this county? How do you turn the police away from the protection of capital to a human, understanding the victim's point of view, treating each call as a human being and putting that element on it? We saw a great presentation here on Monday night of how the bid has transformed the services within this late night economy that are picking up the services of the police in terms of thefts in shops. You know, they've saved £20,000 already, I believe, in terms of thefts from shops. They've saved £28,000 a month on NHS care services by this project, some of the projects that you've been supporting in terms of Safer Worcester. And obviously protecting women late at night. They're picking up these services. They've done that by focusing on people rather than business, economy, money. They've had a fundamental shift in their paradigm of what they're about. Do you think the police can reflect that and bring that confidence back in? And I've worked in this city council for 14 years. I've had a relationship with various police officers over the years, ranging from 16 and 18, and credit where credit's due. Local police officers, Kieran Redmond, I'd like to highlight, Alex Denny, Ed Shotton, all these are great police officers that understand community policing and have got relationships within the cluster, and they respond, they understand our needs. That confidence needs to be restored back. If you can reassure this committee and this city that you will be making those headways and those changes in order to restore that confidence.
I don't agree with every premise of what you've just asserted, Chairman, in my humble opinion. We're all politicians sat around this table. There's very few of us in this room that get over 50% share of the vote when we go to the ballot box, and indeed the government of the country has just won the country with just around a third of the vote. Policing and all the testing that I do, and indeed is done independently, has a public confidence rate about the 80% mark. And indeed, there is some dip in confidence when we see those who have been involved in the criminal justice system and indeed let down by the criminal justice system dipping. We do see some lesser confidence in some parts of our communities who are either seldom heard or disproportionately policed. So I don't accept that it's perhaps as universal as you described it. We do have issues within our society. There is also a huge problem that 50% of the society, I think, are disadvantaged by their gender. I talk to women who feel unsafe jogging about the place because of the unwanted attention that they face. Now, those behaviours, unfortunately, are in policing as they are in society. And so I wouldn't want you or anybody else on this committee to think that there is an underlying issue that isn't one that we also have in society. And I do believe that West Mercia Police is trusted by the society that it serves, and I do believe we will continue to work hard to maintain that. We are not London. We are not the Met, where their figures are half in terms of confidence that we see here. And lastly, just a very brief comment in relation to how we go forward, and you touch on things like the bid, the work of this city council, the work of other partners. That's exactly what it is supposed to be. You have obligations, statutory duties under legislation in relation to the issues that we're talking about tonight, as do I, as do the police, as do some other partners. And it's not about what the individual does, it's what we do together. And that's why things like community safety partnerships, the Safer Communities project that I referred to earlier, they are so powerful in changing and maximising what we can do for our society, because my citizens are no different to your citizens. They're the same people, aren't they? And we in the public sector have to do ever more to join up our activity to make sure their best interests are our joint endeavour.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time here as always. Wish you a pleasant evening. And yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it. And Superintendent Morgan, thank you for your time as well. Thank you. Lloyd, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chair, I think you're going to invite members to just change the order slightly so that we hear the Community Safety Partnership item next, because that's a natural follow-on from the PCC item. Just to try and clarify the points around the exemptions then. So we've got two items this evening that have got elements that are what we've classed as exempt within the agenda pack. We've probably unintentionally misled members. What they are confidential items and not exempt items. And the reason for that is that within the CSP item, the exempt appendix is a document, an official document that's been provided by the police. That's not for onward sharing for public consumption. So we can share it with this committee, but we've not been given it and asked to provide it further onwards. And the item that relates to the full dispersal asylum seeker policy, again, that's been provided by the West Midlands Strategic Migration Partnership. It's come from the Home Office, but again, it's not for public consumption. So the reason for both papers being on pink papers is that because they're confidential and not exempt. So that's the advice, Chair.
Chair, could I just follow that up, if I may, briefly? I'm only referring to item 12, not item 11.
So the reason for my reply correlates to both papers, Chair, that I've got exempt items this evening.
Yeah, I'm just trying to establish, Chair, that's all it is, and perhaps I'm being obtuse. I don't think I am, but I can't see why item 12 is confidential. It's talking about an issue which is politically highly charged, and therefore I think that's all the more reason not to discuss it in secret, because people say, what's in it? Why is it secret? It does not help democracy, and I think there's got to be a very good reason why it is. I can understand the confidentiality bit about commercial. I understand all that. But in this item, I mean, there's just 4 pages of it. Well, less than that, basically. I can't see what is in it that we're not allowed to discuss in public. What the public may not know, must not know, not be allowed to know. And it bothers me because I think there's an ulterior reason why this may be confidential. And it's not the reason that I understand that we have exempt items. That's my concern, Chair. So I really do need to clarify all this. I mean, once I've got an answer, I'll shut up and leave it there. But we haven't got an answer why this document is secret and we can't discuss it in public.
Thank you, Chair. The document isn't secret because we've put it as part of a committee agenda pack, so members can debate that and members represent their residents. So in terms of the legislation that applies to confidential and exempt items, there is one element of confidentiality which relates to information given to the Council by a government department on terms which forbid its public disclosure. This information has been provided by the Home Office, has come through the West Midlands Strategic Migration Partnership, and we've been asked not to put it into the public domain. So that's the reason for the confidentiality, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so next item is the performance scorecard, I believe. We're going to go to community safety. Okay, so community safety partnership.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so as mentioned by John Campion, the local authority has statutory duty under the Community Safety Partnership, and part of that is to scrutinise its activity and hence bringing or putting together this report for you tonight. So this is going to be an annual thing, and I will take a little bit of time on the front end of this because I'm aware of new members compared to when we met last year, just to give you the context. But after that, I'll probably skip through the areas and then welcome comments and questions from the members. So we're asking you to note the contents this evening as part of that scrutiny exercise and feedback. And so to give you a bit of context, as I said, in the Crime and Disorder Act, there's a statutory duty for the City Council with partners to tackle crime and disorder in their area. And we've listed a couple of the other statutory bodies in paragraph 2.1. Worcester is part of the South Worcestershire Community Safety Partnership, as referenced previously by John Campion, and that and Gareth also, and that consists of Malvern, Worcester, and Wychavon. They are multi-agency meetings, as referenced previously, and combined based on the strategic information produced by the Police and Crime Commission analyst. We've, as a group, produced an action plan, which you can see in Appendix 1. And then for as an umbrella, that South Worcestershire Community Safety Partnership as an umbrella of more localised groups. So for Worcester, we have the Safer Worcestershire Partnership. Again, more localised agenda items, and as mentioned, Worcester Bid are part of that group, and some of the local projects that you see locally are because of that sort of that sort of more localised focus under the Community Safety Partnership. And for the City Council, it's about delivering on that stronger and connected community element of the city plan. The terms of reference of the Safer Partnership is seen in Appendix 3. And therefore, so you've got the context of Safer Worcester. And then for this report, we've set it out information in the following headings. So we've got the strategic assessment, as I mentioned previously, which drives everything else. The government's arrangements of that, of how we work as a partnership and locally. The funding that's delivered through the West Mercia Police and Crime Commission, which you've already been briefed on this evening. And then a description of the projects and interventions that have occurred over the last 12 months, and then a reference to performance and impact. So the strategic assessment is appendix attached, and that, as we mentioned, is on the pink papers because it's produced for officers and not for public consumption. but the themes are very much around the West Mercia safer West Mercia approach. The Commissioner has created, so that's around safer homes, safer people, and safer roads. And that's then reflected in the action plan that was created by the South Worcestershire Community Safety Partnership. So there are a number of interventions and projects that have been reviewed. Just going on to the governance arrangements then, as part of that South Worcestershire Community Safety Partnership, there's a summary in there where we've reviewed the subject matter that's discussed at the meetings throughout the year with a description of the number of times that we've met and also a description of the duties that the Community Safety Partnership is responsible for, which includes serious organised crime and serious violence for this year as a new duty. Section 5 covers off the funding that's provided, and that's broken down for South Worcestershire for your information. And then there's a sort of summary of the breakdown of the activity of those projects, mainly around the Dawn project, the Cut It Out project, which is training provided to beauty and healthcare professionals because of that trusted relationship to improve awareness about domestic abuse and reporting. And then there's the Worcester Bid Safer Night training portal to support the nighttime economy in being aware of exploitation, spiking, aspirangula, and supporting that safe place scheme that's being run within the city. All very much about supporting that nighttime economy and the bid towards Purple Flag. And then there's the housing services that we provide have a domestic abuse element with prioritised safe accommodation. And statutory duty of local authorities and other partners is carrying out domestic homicide reviews when it's deemed that someone has been has lost their life either a result of domestic abuse or suicide as a result of potential domestic abuse. And there's a breakdown of the domestic homicides that have been completed and work that's gone on with those over the last 12 months in that section. And then also funded through the CSP is the Worcester Street Pastors, again another complementary activity to the nighttime economy and the fact of the Worcester having a high street and a vibrant nighttime economy with that support through the volunteer street pastors. As mentioned before, the safe space then on 6.28. And then we have a number of safe and sound projects we've delivered locally around improving protection of bike against target hardening around bike thefts, so cycle security where we're marking bikes through partnership projects, and then theft and burglary. As combat that, we've created smart water areas in our areas of the city with the highest numbers of burglary in a community, so creating gated communities with smart water projects. And then when we are coming across alarm and distress in the community or vulnerable people, we're providing residents with reassurance and small items and advice on how to protect themselves and make them feel safer in their homes. And then lastly, we've done some targeted education work in high schools, multi-agency community safety days to raise awareness to our young adults around consequences of their behaviour and safeguarding them against open water safety, that sort of thing, to obviously give them better life knowledge and skills when they're making those choices out in our communities. And then we have some funding from the County Council Public Health under section youth intervention section 6.35. That's just detailing the funding that we've had and we've been able to employ additional youth detached officers to support and complement other people's activity, really in a place where people are hanging out and enjoying themselves. Again, delivering on that consequence awareness impact on communities as well as their own safety. Again, open water swimming or loud noise in particular areas or rowdiness and that sort of thing. So lots of mental health awareness, safeguarding support, feeding into Commission services provided by Public Health and others. And officers also attend Get Safe and channel meetings to make sure referrals are made and young people are looked after and protected through those Commission services. So under the antisocial behaviour section, we've attached a map. So a caveat is that map is just the antisocial behaviour that officers have engaged with over the 12 months. It's not the police ASB. That's completely different data. So that's just a summary map of that sort of data about 1,158 adults engaged over the financial year. And another thing that we've brought in over the last couple of years are ward councillor briefings. Some ward councillors will have had their briefing for this year already. Others are hopefully booked in. And that's a really important part, I feel, in sort of working alongside the police as officers and councillors to support our communities, to compare our knowledge of our communities and identify opportunities to either provide resilience or enable communities to improve their own well-being and environment. And there's a summary under 6.41 of the actions taken from last year as a result of those meetings, and obviously we look forward to creating another set of actions following meetings going forwards over the next couple of months. And then there's a couple of examples really then for you about the sorts of ASB and interactions that officers have been working with partners over the last 12 months, just to give you a flavour of the subjects that we get involved with as officers. And then finally, another duty of the council, so two finally, sorry. First one is community triggers. It's the responsibility of the City Council to receive community triggers. These are, we describe them better as antisocial behaviour case reviews. So if someone feels that their case isn't being held by a partner, that could be the City Council, or it could be housing, or it could be the police, or it could be any agency responsible for people's health and well-being, they can come to us not as an alternative to complaints process, because if they haven't followed the complaints process, we will refer them back into that organisation for complaints. But if they feel that they haven't been given the correct service, it's an opportunity as a multi-agency review to see whether as a combined multi-agency, there's something we can do better together. And so we've received 6 over the 12 months. Only 1 has resulted in a case review. As I said, the other instances possibly were because they hadn't followed the complaints process, or they hadn't had the 3 individual incidents within a 12-month period to trigger it. But residents will be supported through that. It won't be just a flat no, it'll be supported about guidance on what they can do and working with partners to make sure that their issues are appropriately given that highlight of need and distress. And then finally, the PSPOs. This committee is well versed on PSPOs, and so that's just a summary of our activity as a committee over the last 12 months and its decision to put some in place and to extend others and put the new railway crossings in place. So I should stop there and open to questions.
Thank you. Take speakers. I've got Councillor Lawrence and Lamb. Base.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Warwick. It's not so much questions, just wanted to praise you for this report. I appreciate it. It's an annual report and it's bound to be extensive, but I'm minded to say this is almost a work of art. It's like a book. It's extremely easy to read. There's so much information there. So thank you very much. I'm amazed at the range of initiatives within this city that exist to keep people safe. You know, you look at the report and just one initiative after another, people working their hardest to keep people safe in all sorts of different ways. And so I wonder whether, you know, officers and councillors could, you know, point residents in the direction of this report or a condensed version to give them reassurance that they do live in a safe city. Because, you know, it does relate to the discussion we had with the Police Crime Commissioner about perception. I think if you read this report, or a summary of, your perception of safety in Worcester will be changed for the better. So I just want to thank you very much and thank everyone who's part of these initiatives throughout the city.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. We do live in probably one of the safest and the best cities in the UK. You know, there's no two ways about it, and that's thanks to everyone in this room, all the officers, all the partnership groups, all the voluntary organisations, all the community safety partnerships that work in their own different ways to keep this obviously city safe. And part of the issues that we were discussing earlier is around actually the standard we hold ourselves to, and that we, you know, trying to achieve, or constantly trying to improve, or constantly trying to challenge, or constantly trying to keep it at the forefront of everybody's mind. So we can challenge all the, you know, the police, we can challenge the police CC, so it keeps us on top of our game. So it's only right that we do that in that sense. But in the same breath, I completely agree. If there's all these initiatives that are going on, what's the best way for us to communicate that to our residents? How do we get that information across so they understand the amount of effort that goes on behind the scenes in order to, you know, in order to keep people safe? I have Councillor Lamb.
I mean, carrying on with the point that's just been made, actually, I mean, one of the initiatives which I found absolutely fascinating, and I wasn't aware of it at all, is this Cut It Out project. You know, when I'm asked how I want my haircut, I often say in silence, please. But you know, I recognise from this that there is often a very close relationship between, you know, people and people who cut their hair or do their nails, whatever. And I was not aware of this, and I thought it's such a brilliant idea. And I suppose my question really is, you know, clearly this is a new project. I assume it's drawing on good practice that has been used somewhere else, I'm guessing. I know we do have original thoughts clearly as a council, but I'm guessing this is good practice. Have we got any sort of evidence of the effectiveness yet? I mean, who provides the training here? I see it's 3 hours, but who provides that training, and how is it being promoted? Because I just love this idea that, you know, you've got someone, you know, who's got a badge, so you feel this person's had this training. I can therefore might be able to sort of tell them something, you know, because I feel comfortable with them. So I'm just fascinated by this. So if you can just tell me just a little bit more about it, because it sounds such a great idea that, as we've already said, I'm not sure we're aware widely that this kind of initiative is taking place.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So, yes, it has been borrowed with pride from Norfolk, so which is where it originated. It's a recognised model and brand that is being rolled out across different areas, championed by Martin Lakeman, who's a consultant that came to the Community Safety Partnership and pitched the idea for funding from the PCC that's allocated to the CSB. Initially, it was funded by Worcester Bid, actually, in the Worcester Bid district, to run some sessions within this very building, in this very room, I think, even for our local hairdressers. So where we are with it at the moment, as you say, it was rolled out last year as an initial tranche. We're looking at the evaluating that impact at the moment to sort of see very much on, and this is only talked about today at the Community Safety Partnership meeting this morning, in the fact that we need to understand its impact, because obviously we can't, we almost need it to be sustainable rather than sort of keep running the training programs each year. So we're working with Martin Lakeman to understand, have we trained everyone? Is there more people to train? Is there a way of making this project sustainable? Because Ask for Angela was a new project a couple of years ago. When tested, that was a bit weak. When you know, people, the Vorg officer went out and started asking for Angela, literally in the nighttime economy. A lot of people knew, but we recognised the turnover of staff, the night-term economy, you know, that sort of churn and other things happening meant that it wasn't everyone. And worst case scenario, you don't want to need Angela and not get that support. So the police have done some brilliant work with the bid and some training and that training package, that online training package that I mentioned earlier, so that when recently tested on the nighttime economy, it was 100% compliance. In fact, people went above and beyond, you know, in a couple of examples for the nighttime staff. So yeah, it's like following that trend. That was the new thing a couple of years ago. Let's try and get this cut it out scheme sort of embedded, and so we just need to do that market testing really to sort of say, has what we've done worked? Is it being adopted and used by those who've done the training?
Thank you. Councillor Wilmore.
Thank you, Chair. And of all the wonderful initiatives in this document, this was also the one that really stood out to me. Hairdressers consistently, not only do they have one of the highest job satisfactions, but they consistently rate as a group of people who members of the public will divulge more information to than they will even, you know, kind of close family and friends. And I have many half-baked grant applications in my drawer at work, and one of them is around using barbers and hairdressers for mental health first aid. And particularly with barbers, you know, we know that death by suicide is the biggest killer of young men under the age of 40. And I just think barbers would be in such a wonderful position with some basic mental health first aid. And so whilst I don't want to dilute the scheme, I would just, you know, if there is a chance at some point in the future to expand this into using the same group of people, but to extend it not just from the domestic violence and awareness, but into basic mental health first aid, then that would be a fabulous and worthwhile project to pursue, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Councillor Wilmore, in terms of barbers holding the power. I remember walking into a barber's on Monday. I think I was seething over a problem. He sat me down, gave me some water, and showed me a razor blade. So I calmly sat down. I didn't say a word afterwards. Did you want to come back on that, Neil?
There is a county-wide, isn't it, orange button scheme that Tom's an ambassador for, which potentially could dovetail quite nicely into the rollout. Yeah.
Councillor Mace.
Thank you. I was just say I feel disappointed I don't get to go to the barbers that often, so I'm glad to hear about the orange button scheme. Yeah, so thank you for the report. As Neil said, it's great and very detailed. I think this has been one of the most eye-opening things for me since I became a councillor, is the amount of work that the community safety team put in to keep our city a safe and pleasant place. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for the community briefing for St Stephen on Monday. That was also very useful and educational. I just had one really basic question, is around the bike marking, who can look up bike registered bikes, as I have previously found a abandoned bike and raised it with the Safer Neighbourhood team after looking up the frame number and finding it wasn't marked as stolen, and unfortunately they didn't follow up on it and look up whether it was stolen and help get it back to its owner. So I was wondering if there's anyone else who can help look it up.
Yeah, so it's called the bike registration scheme. So absolutely, if people are know that their bike was registered, the Safer Neighbourhood team, I'm sure through us can help with that. But yeah, if you're struggling to get responses, let us know, and the team will either contact bike registration directly or through police officers, identify that, add that to the case file, as it were, for if that bike is found, obviously to make sure that it goes back to the owner and they're checking. So it's just like it's just a similar exercise to the We Don't Buy Crime, isn't it? With the smart water, you know, it's encouraging people when they find items to either use the infrared check or look for the bike marking registration. I don't know, Gareth, if you want to come in on that.
Just building on the points that you raised there, you know, fantastic initiative. We see it with the smart water, how that's expanded, and marking your bikes and getting those extra measures. If someone's reporting it and they're not, probably building on something I said earlier, that they're not getting that response back, then please, you've got ways and means through the CSP or through myself just to raise it, so we can get that expedited as soon as we can, really.
Thank you. Councillor Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So I was on Safer Worcester when I was first a councillor, still on it. Really loved that meeting. It's so helpful. I've sort of, pushed to remain on it, I think, at that time. But I've just joined the Safer Worcester Partnership. What's it called? Sorry, the Worcestershire. Yes. Today was my first meeting. So another really, really helpful group of people to be aware of and to speak with. So I really appreciate that. The ward briefing, I haven't had any notice of one, I don't think, unless I've missed it. Could you just get back to me later with when it is?
Definitely. Tomorrow, you'll have a response, yeah.
Meeting's not tomorrow, though. Thank you.
Good. Do we have any other speakers on the item? Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. The two things I wanted to just mention was, one, praise for the housing team, because, you know, on a case that I worked with them on, they were extremely good at rehousing a victim of domestic abuse. And she and her children now feel much more settled. They're in social housing and thriving. And that was dealt with quite quickly. And the only advice I gave the young woman was, just tell them everything, don't be embarrassed. You know? And the housing actually just took that on, understood what she was telling them, and acted on that fairly quickly. So, you know, my compliments to them. They understood what they were being told and acted to sort it. Regarding the domestic homicide review, this is the first time I've really seen anything, because I'm not on this committee, generally speaking. So one of the things we all probably know is that domestic homicide, as we're calling it here, is a stubborn statistic. I mean, about 3 women a fortnight, sometimes 4. It's around that, will be killed in this country. And that's been going on for at least 30 years that I can think of, probably longer. So it's of some comfort that really strong action is being taken in the locality on this. And I would be very interested to see further updates on this, to see what the outcomes are and how that informs prevention work and stuff like that.
Through you, Chair. All the published reports are on our website. So that is an important part of the process. It's a public document once it's signed off by the Home Office. Yeah, that you'll find on our website all the ones relevant to Worcester. Obviously, if from outside the district, they'll be there. The action plans are combined into one action plan for the Community Safety Partnership to review and take responsibility for. The process involves multi-agency partners that had touching points with that person, or both perpetrator and victim, and the wider family, obviously where it's appropriate. Learning is part of that process. Those actions are for embedding, and certainly it's quite a lengthy process going to and from the very. So sometimes we find that the learning's already embedded before the action plan is produced. So yes, improvements are being made. Communication between partners is improving as part of my reflection and involvement in the process of that review. I think they're now going to be called DARDs rather than DHR, so don't get used to the DHR, because to move away from that homicide element, because the duty is around if it's related to suicide as a result of domestic abuse. So they're moving away from the homicide name in it because of that. I don't know if you want to add anything, Gary?
Only that, we do learn from the action plan, and that does, from my previous role, impact on training. So if there's any reassurance with regards to that, we do get those lessons learned, just as Warwick said. Sometimes that's ahead of the curve with regards to the action plan, that we do seek to embed that. So there is some joined up thinking.
Thank you, because if there's one thing I know from all the sociological research is that perpetrators don't stop. They have to be stopped. So thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments? This item now. Yeah, I mean, the observation I made, Warwick, in this is that there's obviously quite a lot of issues and around obviously youth and antisocial behaviour, and now, I mean, given pre-COVID, the level of resources and weren't great. I mean, you can kind of say there's two generations of teenage kids that have kind of severely missed out in our due to the various funding cuts, whether it be county, whether it be central government, over that period, and that has contributed quite a lot to what the increase in social behaviour, or antisocial behaviour that we're seeing now, because kids haven't got a home anymore, they haven't got a youth club, they haven't got all the facilities that they've kind of been neglected, and up until COVID, I suppose, which kind of brought the issue to a fore, where you had kids hanging around on street corners causing issues, and I know Gareth and I worked on a project through Perryfields Community Association, which was highly successful in terms of bringing agencies together, highlighting the problem, and reducing that antisocial behaviour, and which went on to be, had some really, really good positive outcomes in terms of obviously getting those young people into the workforce through community skills programs. It seems that element is kind of missing, that pathway, that joined up thinking in terms of actually, we'll have a small pot of money to do a small project in one area, measure the outcomes. Yeah, it's great. Kids got off the street for about 6 weeks, but where's the follow-up? Where's the follow-up in terms of we're seeing actually what those kids doing now, how we can kind of help them, what are their career path choices, kind of life. So, having a full cycle program in place, and I think WCT have a major input into this in terms of actually, are they serving those kids from those estates and from all those areas across the city? Are they fulfilling their true potential and the duty to help these kids out on their street? And in terms of that, so I'd like to say in terms of part of this is that if we're concentrating on youth, then let's have a complete program. We've got the Young People's Champion here. Mark Mann was the previous Young People's Champion. Just let's sit together in terms of actually working on tackling this issue at the root cause of it, rather than just isolated projects here and there.
Thank you, Chair. We're starting on that path. I think we have the Youth Collaborative, which was part of the requirement, a part of that county public health funding that came through. We obviously want to work in partnership, so we need to bring everyone with us on that journey. And the Youth Collaborative, it does have a significant membership. So yes, Worcester Community Trust is a major part of that membership, but there are others. There are lots of, as you mentioned before, charity. That VCS sector is providing a lot of support services, and getting to understand the breadth and width of it has taken time. And so one of those aspirations of that group is actually to create a directory of what actually is out there for young people, and that's starting to form. So hopefully the next meeting, which is in a couple of weeks, we'll sign that off and get that into a form where young people can see, you know, all the things that are available for them to do, rather than think, oh, there's nothing here for me, and to promote what services are available. But yes, there is an element of, and part of that group wants to understand what people, young people want, and what they're looking for to do. So getting that intelligence back by engaging with them and seeking that feedback. So yeah, Councillor Casey Collier is invited to the next Youth Collaborative meeting. She is coming. So I think between us, that's definitely a listening and aspiration opportunity to take things forward.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of highlight that listening element. I mean, the PED on Monday approved the play plan, which included several projects, and one of those was the Horizon project now. In terms of the resurfacing, now I mentioned that it took me 10 years to get that project. Obviously, the conception of it, in terms of doing something about it, but actually, as part of that Perryfields Community Association project, which Gareth was heavily involved in, is that was one of the outcomes in saying, listen, you haven't invested in my local play area. It's retarded. It's not fit for purpose. Other areas in the city are getting the investment. Why are we being left out? And since that day, I think since 2020, I think it was, yeah, 2020, the official opening for that, Gareth, will be tomorrow, in terms of that project being resurfacing and the council doing that. So you can imagine how long it's taken us to get there. But we've got there, you understand. And all the young people that we were talking to there are probably young adults now in terms of that, but they realise the benefit of that. And that's actually, the council has come good on what they said they were going to do in terms of that. And that's the kind of belief we need to get back into them, saying that actually our voices are being heard. Yes, it'll take some time, but we're going to get things done. And once the young people have that belief that actually things are going to get done in their area, then that's where we win them back. Are we all in agreement to note that? All in favour? Thank you very much. That's noted. Item number 7, affordable housing. Thank you. Yep, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Can I be so bold as to suggest we have a break?
Yeah, sure. Can we have a 5-minute recess?
Sorry to steal your thunder there, James, but yeah, sorry. Sorry, I'm trying to be mean, but
Thank you. We'll resume the meeting now. Slight change of order. We're going to have affordable housing delivery next instead of quarter performance report. Over to you, James.
So I'll focus on the key messages and then come back to the recommendations at the end. I think there are three main issues to consider. One is the national picture in terms of affordable housing delivery. Two, what we're doing at the Worcester level at this moment in time and endorsement of what we're doing, and our aspirations and implications for future delivery. We've discussed this committee before about the national picture regarding the delivery of affordable housing. There's certainly a significant issue around delivery of affordable housing, particularly through planning obligation at a national level. There's a lot of sites nationally where the developer is struggling to get a registered provider to take the affordable units, and this is obviously concerning for everybody, because those are units that would be let to people in housing need. And the options for the local planning authority are, well, to change the planning agreement, take a community sum, to do whatever, which is never ideal. There's a sort of joint, at the national level, there's a joint initiative between the local government association, Homes England, and the government department, involving also registered providers and house builders, about why there's such a stopgap, why there's such a delay in sites coming forward. We've talked before about registered providers don't have the capacity within their business plans as they used to, and there's detail of this in the report, but it's about inflationary pressures, it's about pressures in terms of their own stock and maintaining of their own stock, and a lot of the resources are diverted towards doing things which they should necessarily be doing around damp and mould, fire safety, etc., which has squeezed their development programmes. There's also a situation, a lot of registered providers are very large organisations now, and they operate across multiple local authorities, and to a certain extent they are focused on whatever is their strategic direction. And at the moment it does appear that their strategic direction is moving away from picking up Section 106 sites, but also smaller sites, small little infill sites, apartment sites, for example, that may well be the sort of offers we have in Worcester. So there is that sort of national picture, and there are some questions about whether the delivery of affordable housing as it is now, which is predominantly through planning obligation, is, you know, in itself restricting delivery. Certainly the house builders are saying, well, if we can't get registered providers to take the affordable housing units, we need a cascade arrangement where we effectively pay the local authority a sum of money and move on. So there's quite a lot of debate nationally around this. And I think for a while, has the national delivery actually met the needs of the local authority? I mean, it's all right if you've got land and you've got a lot of sites coming through, but if, like us, you don't have that, is national delivery really, on the money that's going to the big organisations like Homes and some of the big RPs, is that really impacting our delivery? Because we don't have the land to offer. We don't have the opportunities. We have some regeneration sites in the future, but obviously with viability concerns now, that may well be some time in the future. So I think those questions are all in the air, and I think it's a good opportunity, because we've got a new government, for local authorities to influence policy around the delivery of affordable housing and regeneration. And I think it's good that the LGA has stepped forward to lead on this. And I think it's incumbent on us and other local authorities to, you know, make our voices heard. So that's the sort of strategic national picture. At the local level, we are we have acquired a couple of units through the Local Authority Housing Fund scheme, which is a specific scheme to support people through the Homes for Ukraine and the Afghan relocation programme. So it's a government-funded scheme. Now, we were operating that with a registered provider who then pulled out, and we picked up some of the slack in terms of phase 1, and we've applied for phase 3 as well. So we're able to do this as a council because the grant funding is fairly generous, and we've had some couple of opportunities to where it works for us financially, and the council has an investment policy which sets parameters for us to invest in anything that will pay off within a certain amount of time, and we're able to do this with this particular scheme. I think within the current financial parameters, the amount that we can intervene in the market will always be marginal, because we don't have capital, we don't have land particularly to put into the equation, so it will always be a bit of a marginal, something we should always do and take advantage of, but it's more sort of reactive and opportunistic rather than perhaps being strategic and saying, well, what should we do with this area, etc., because we just simply do not have the resources ourselves. So we're relying on third-party grant and potentially opportunities where we can do something with land or assets, and various other opportunities. If we can save money in another area, for example, if we're spending a lot of money on housing people in temporary accommodation, can we use a sort of cost to save approach? But it's marginal and it's opportunistic, but we will continue doing that. And part of this report is about supporting that approach. And I suppose moving on from that is about, if we do have ambitions to do more in the city, to do more in Worcester, what mechanisms do we need to put in place to facilitate that and be realistic about what we can achieve? One, I suppose it's the financial input, the financial side of it. Two, it's our partners. You know, with 1 or 2 units of housing, the council could manage those units within existing resources. But if we have ambitions to deliver more units, we don't have a management team in-house. We have access to repairs contractor who are mostly used to doing commercial buildings, etc. But that capacity needs to be thought about and addressed. So the third aspect is just to think, and what do we want to do, and what are our ambitions, and how we're going to meet those ambitions. And that will require some sort of change in our, I suppose, some change in the way we approach the financing of it, also some way in terms of how we work with partners. Do we need to find different partners? Do we act as the buyer of the units and bring a partner in to just manage the whole lot? Or do we look for more of a joint venture approach? We have spent a lot of time speaking to registered providers, haven't we, our traditional partners, and we are probably going to have to look at other partners, and we may have to look at simply procuring in services, because I don't think there's a massive amount of appetite out there within our tradition. For genuine reasons, they don't have the money they used to have, and they're reluctant to take on risk, because I think a lot of registered providers have been, you know, they've had difficulties of their own in terms of maintaining their own stock, so they're quite reluctant to take on sort of units we'd be looking at. So those are the 3 main aspects of the report, and there's a lot of detail in the report, and please feel free to question me on specific details. But if we just go back to the recommendations, 2 of the recommendations, 1 and 3, are simply, as I've said, noting what's happening at a national level and understanding that we as a local authority, both politically and at an officer level, need to get engaged in the conversation. The current system is not producing the outputs it should be. I mean, we shouldn't talk about affordable housing as outputs, but, you know, but as a simply way to say, it's not providing the outputs. There are quite significant numbers of affordable housing that are sitting there waiting for a registered provider, nationally, waiting for a registered provider to acquire. And a lot of those are going to be lost to the sector because after a certain length of time, it is unreasonable to expect a developer just to sit on them without an end buyer. So I think it's a good time for politicians, in particular, also officers, to use their influence to look at different sort of options and solutions. More specific recommendations around our current programme. I mean, our current programme is small, but it's a few units here and there, and we've acquired 2 units. First tenant's moving in tomorrow. We spoke internally about the idea that when you acquire a property, you need the money to maintain that property, and there are things that will come up down the line. For example, replacement of the kitchen, replacement of the bathroom, we've got to do the gas safety test every year, etc., etc. So we will need to get into a principle of retaining and setting aside money to maintain the properties in the future, rather than that money floating off into just the general coffers. So when we take on an asset, we have to maintain that asset. We're going to look to procure an operational management service. Now, that may be through a registered provider, or it may be through a commercial partner, which we will draw down upon if we require it. If we get an opportunity to acquire some properties, 10 properties, for example, which we're not going to be able to handle in-house, then we want someone in place that we can say, full package, yes, we can acquire these, and this is our management partner. So that's what we'll be looking to doing. So we're looking for approval to do that. And in terms of any rent we set, we're looking to set our rent at the local housing allowance rate at this moment in time. It's a bit more than social rent, but there is a balance between, but it's less than, obviously less than market. It's probably less than the 80% of market rent, which is what you can charge for an affordable rent, 80% of market rent, and it's still affordable. But obviously in the current climate of market rents being so high, even 80% is not that affordable for a lot of people on low incomes. But I think a local housing allowance rate is a reasonable rate for property. If the rent's too low, then our ability to make it work within the council's investment plan parameters is a lot more difficult, because obviously we need income in to finance the borrowing and the management maintenance, etc. And thirdly is to note that a further report will be presented to this committee to look at the council's, or endorse the council's ambitions for the future in terms of the targets it wants to set and how it's going to meet those targets. And I think there's a broader conversation to have with potential partners and our corporate colleagues as well. So that's the basis of the report. And is there anything more detail you want, Chair, or you're happy to go to questions?
No, thank you. I think that for the time being is fine. I'm sure members have got their individual questions, if that's okay. Thank you, James. I'll put it up to the floor. I've got Councillor Lawrence first, and then Lawrence, and then Mace.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. I mean, everybody needs affordable housing. It's definitely, you know, it's critical, and makes a huge difference to anybody to be in good accommodation. I met one of my residents who was living in very poor accommodation 6 months ago, and he's moved into much better accommodation. And frankly, when he walked up to me, I didn't recognise him, because he was not the sallow, nervous, cold person that I'd seen in the winter, and he'd put on weight and was happy and smiling. And I just, hello, who are you? So very, very critical that we get that for everybody's health and for the good of the community. There is going to be a problem within this city, because we've got a lot of already developed land. And what I was wondering is if there's anything we could do about looking at and mapping the brownfield sites and derelict buildings that could possibly be used, but there's obviously this impediment because they need clearing, there's the legality, that they need laying on services and other groundworks, and sort of map what that would cost, and then somehow put that to central government perhaps, or someone as a bridging thing, so it becomes the equivalent price of, if you're breaking ground on a greenfield, to take that away from the property developer. So they're then not having to add that cost into the house. Do you think anything could be done with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of awareness of what's around in the city, and that there are some obvious sites in the city that everyone knows about that are not coming forward for whatever reason. I think that as part of the strategic approach, we need to engage more with landowners in the city, and work with landowners to bring their sites forward. You're right that local authority plays a role in terms of some of the funding that's around to, or potentially, hopefully will still be around, but has previously been around, to unlock sites, some of the infrastructure funding, etc., etc. But I think we need to engage more with some of the big local landowners here, which we don't. Well, I haven't been here that long, but there are a number of sites that are sort of sitting around where, I mean, it's not always that easy to engage with landowners, have their own priorities and their own aspirations, and it's their land, so why shouldn't they? But I think we need to perhaps create a better argument about why more of a sort of joint approach with the local authority and the funding sector is advantageous to everybody. I mean, there is often a tendency, I don't know this area as well as I should, but I know where I'm from. There are well-known landowner developers whose strategy is to sit on something for 20 years and then develop it. And that is often the weight in it will come good approach is often used quite often. And so far it's paid dividends, because a lot of lenders may see the current situation as a dip, but in 10 years' time, prices will be rocketing again. And although construction costs are still going to be high, relatively it'll be less high. But yeah, I certainly think that's something we need to do. And it's a good point you made about infrastructure and being strategic about the infrastructure we need.
Thank you. You've got, I think it's Councillor Lawrenson, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report.
Sorry?
Is that working? Yeah, we're up against it, aren't we, trying to get affordable housing, and I appreciate you're trying your absolute best to see what we can do to build homes that people can live in Worcester. But it seems that fundamentally the problem we have is, as page 6, 3.24, this council does not have a capital budget to support the acquisition and development of affordable housing. Yeah. So we don't have our own budget to build homes. That fundamentally, to me, is the problem, but you're doing your best to work around that. And I've got a couple of questions, not just commenting. It stated in the same paragraph, 3.24, that the council will be able to utilise external grant funds when these are available. However, in 3.3, on page 3, it says there has been a very limited response to any request from the council to registered providers for joint working on specific funding initiatives. So whilst we're willing to look for pots of money whenever they may arise, we're not getting the buy-in from, well, haven't had the support, the buy-in from registered providers. So the first question is, how confident are we that we will be successful in applying for grant funding in the absence of our own core budget? If I could just ask that one and then come back to number 2. Is that all right?
Properties of the second-hand market, so it's a different ball game to if we find a brownfield site and we want to deliver a bigger scheme. For us, we would need a partner in place. Now, traditionally, we would go to a registered provider and say, "Hi, we've got this land, or we've found this land, or whatever. Can you apply for grant?" And off you go. Now, we know that at this moment in time, and this may last for a few years, registered providers have maxed out in terms of their borrowing, and they're very particular about what sites they want to deliver. We can look at a joint venture. The council is a registered provider, and we can apply for grant in our own right. We would need to achieve investment partner status, which isn't that difficult for a registered provider. So we could attract in money. I think in terms of new build, we're entering it's one thing acquiring a property, which most of us have probably done here ourselves. But when it comes to new build, we're into a world of new experience and you know, sort of a leap of faith. So I think we need to bring in a partner on the development side and possibly on the management and maintenance side. I think for a registered provider, the big issue for them, if they don't have any financial capacity, that's not why they're not bringing the sites forward. If we could take on the asset, if you like, so we're effectively buying the thing, they're just providing the services as a partner. And if they're doing that, they may as well apply for grant because they've got all the structures and infrastructure in place to deal with Homes England. So yes, we will attract grants, but I think there's a bigger question. Everything we need to do is sustainable in terms of our development capacity and also in terms of our management maintenance capacity. So yeah, I would be confident if we magicked up the site, we would attract grant on it. We look at the sites we've had in the past, if the council, you know, the Sampson Road swimming pool site, if the council decided to do that itself, it would have got grant funding on it. We just need to make sure that we've got the skills and capacity to deliver that, which is probably about linking up with a registered provider that already has the development team in place. So yeah, I don't think achieving grant is necessarily an issue.
Thank you. Obviously reassuring. Yes, I'm still concerned about the idea of applying for pots of money or grant funding, because you said yourself this is opportunistic rather than strategic. And part of the reason why the committee system or the council exists is to write strategy so we can plan ahead and make sure that people have services that they need. Whereas you've openly said in presenting this paper that we're having to be opportunistic because that's the way that council funding seems to work these days. So as well as working with the LG Local Government Association to influence housing policy, can we argue for a capital budget for affordable housing through the LGA? And the question I've been asking for 12 years, well, seems like it. Can we also argue for the restoration of the central government grant, which obviously applies to all council funding, not just affordable housing? So if we're going to the LGA anyway to get their help to influence housing policy, can we also use their expertise and moral support to restore what we had so that we can have meaningful strategic discussions because we've got the money, rather than just constantly applying for grant funding, which keeps coming up in these conversations?
Chair, I think we'd all agree with Councillor Robinson, and I know, you know, as senior officers, and including David Blake, every opportunity we get to bang the drum for, you know, 2, 3, 4 year settlements, we do, and I know the LGA do the same, so we'll continue to do that.
Could I just come back on one point as well? I think briefly, you make a very good point about capital, because we don't have a capital budget, and we have to be opportunistic because we have no capital ourselves. So local authority housing fund works for us because the grant rate is very attractive. So we can make that work within the council's current investment plan. If we were going to push that investment plan out, then the council would need to review some of the parameters of that plan. Which would mean we would be able to put less grant in to make it work.
Yeah, I'll come back on that strategic point later, Lawrence, when I sum up. Councillor Mace.
Thank you for the report. I think I absolutely wholeheartedly endorse the approach that it represents. About 20 years ago, I used to work for Allpay, who are a common payment provider for social housing. We had hundreds of social housing providers on our books. And I think the story of the industry for the last 20 years has been rationalisation and larger housing associations that we've obviously seen with the merging of Worcester Community Housing into Platform. And I think the issues we have around them not taking on smaller sites is essentially, you know, it's obviously their books are very tight, like you've already said, but also, you know, it's a rounding error to them. They're not accountable to Worcester, they're accountable to the wider industry, and we don't have housing providers who are invested in making sure that Worcester has its supply of affordable homes. And I know one of the main issues that comes up in casework, but I'm sure everyone else deals with as well, is dealing with social housing providers and having residents who are told it's not their problem and then they have to come to us and they're not directly accountable to us. So I think providing social housing by the council itself under our democratic control is a much better solution for everyone. We'll make sure that we're able to get the houses built that we need in Worcester. And I think, you know, if we're looking at opportunities for grants and finding areas that we can build things, I know in the Green Manifesto we wanted to see a zero carbon housing development built in Worcester, and if we can find opportunities for that, I think that would be a really stellar thing that we can sell the city on, to say, look, this is something we've done and we're leading the way across the country. So I definitely absolutely endorse this and hope we can see more. I do have 3 questions based on what I just mentioned about working for Allpay all those years ago. What methods of payments can tenants currently use for paying their social rent where their house is owned by the council?
I mean, tenants will have every option. We will use the same system we use temporary accommodation, and they will have an option to pay by direct debit, so they can pay cash, post office, they can pay at PayPoint, either with card usually, but so every system to pay. We'd like to get people on direct debits because it's more permanent accommodation, but you know, they have options to pay cash, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say we need to make sure we have direct debit, because I think, again, from Allpay's experience, the debts for residents was much lower and much more reliable payments if they're using direct debits. There's a number of mentions in the report about if we pass 199 dwellings, we will need to open a housing revenue account. What are the extra burdens that brings?
It's probably more of a question. I mean, a housing revenue account is a distinct account within the general fund, so you're effectively running 2 accounts, which will have a resource in itself. The housing revenue account is also ring fenced, so there won't be opportunity to move money from one to the other. So if you're running housing outside of a housing revenue account, and I may not be right, you can use your surplus for other things, but once you're within that housing revenue account, you can't. There's a ring fence on the money. So really, it's just the resourcing of running a separate account. There will be some more returns, so the more administrative returns. Do you still have to do a housing revenue? You probably still have to do a housing revenue account business plan. But essentially, our housing owned under the general fund, I mean, probably don't call it a general fund in Worcester because there's only one account, but we still issue the same tenancies, we still have the same obligations, we still have the same regulator. So it's pretty much the same. It's just that we're setting up a second account, which will obviously have some more administrative burdens to it. There may be other things that I'm not aware of, but as far as I'm aware, it is just that sort of administrative side.
Final question was, how relevant do we think delivering our own affordable housing is to the performance indicator to deliver 200 affordable dwellings per year?
Well, it's going to add, obviously. Again, I've said that at this moment in time, within the current parameters, and things can change quite quickly, we'll be quite opportunistic. So we're probably not going to deliver a significant number without some other capital coming our way or opportunities presenting themselves. But yeah, it will add, obviously, because we're acquiring units. Yeah, I mean, if it sounds perverse, if house prices crash 30%, we've got a better opportunity of delivering more units, perversely. But yeah. And if borrowing costs come down as well for us, we will have more. At the moment, we're operating in quite difficult parameters.
Thank you. I think social housing, I think, is the solution to the housing crisis in general. So I'm really excited to see this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Lamb?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, as already been noted, and I think we've noted in previous meetings, is the key problem is supply. You know, we simply don't have enough houses of the right sort. And I think historically we've relied too much on the private sector and market forces to determine the housing stock, to the extent that, you know, the last government was forced by its own backbenchers to abandon central targets. And I think now we're in a new era, a new paradigm of state intervention. You know, there is a desire to use the state to intervene to sort of make up for the shortcomings of the free market. And there is the promise of more devolved power, which hopefully will also include housing. You know, the government has stated, you know, they want to build 300,000 more houses. You know, there's the idea that targets will be brought back. And we will, as a council, have, you know, targets that we've got to meet. And there could be, to be honest with you, I mean, it's a two-edged sword, isn't it? Because we'll be told that we've got to build more housing, and that's great. I think it's really important. But that might also mean sometimes us sort of, our powers of sort of saying we're not going to have these kind of houses built might be curtailed, actually. So it's going to be interesting, more power, but at the same time, we're not going to be able to stand and say, well, we're not going to have this built in my ward, for example. So it's going to be an interesting sort of new world, to be honest with you. I mean, what I was going to ask is that, you know, back to this 199 council dwellings, you know, how many do we have now? And I'm not expecting a figure, but are we expecting it to be 20, 30, 40, 50? I've got no idea. So how many council dwellings do we actually own now? And what do we anticipate the figure being? Okay.
Plus we have 19 shared ownership dwellings that we've had for quite a long time under quite a sort of old style lease. And we have the temporary accommodation units that we own. So that's really our portfolio at the moment. In terms of where we get to,
That's down to our ambition.
yeah.
Our ambition, political will, and having a strategy that we can go out and work with partners about it. And I think, I mean, just would be probably a good time to intervene in terms of summing up, James, is that actually that political will, the plan, and actually a focus away from ourselves. If we understand, we've always looked to them to be the golden answer and solution to our housing problem, but actually there are other developers out there. There are smaller developers that with smaller sites that could, you know, slowly edge us away up to closer to that 199 figure. You know, there's willing people out there that we can go and talk to, and that's part of the ambition that Lynn and I have and our administration have, is that collaborating work with the people that we've forgotten about, that they've always been there, and that could provide the solution for us. It's about providing the framework and the necessary governance in order for those smaller players to be able to sit at the same table as the bigger ones and be seen as equal partners in this. And that's, I'm hoping that our next report will bring some mechanisms in place for us to be able to give us the license and the authority to be able to do that, I think. And only, you know, last year we had this, the Sheriff's Gate project, which for all intensive purposes, probably a step too far in terms of the number of units we wanted to realise, and a significant multi-million pound liability if we were going to take it on. But actually, we were at the point of considering it. You understand? You know, obviously we decided against it on the basis of the evidence, but that's the level of ambition we kind of need to show, that followed with a solid plan, backed with the political will, in order to be able to solve this problem. And as Councillor Lamb has highlighted, in terms of the planning issues and the reforms that are around there, we've got to be able to take advantage where we can in terms of that, some of those devolutions, and just press home to the public that actually look at the need in Worcester. The last time I checked, there was about over 3,000 people on our housing waiting register. Many more first-time buyers and unable to get onto that market because simply there aren't enough units that are suitable for first-time buyers or families. Unless there's any more speakers, can we take the recommendations on block, please? We all happy? 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3? Thank you, that's carried. Okay, so we have the much anticipated Q1 performance report.
Thank you, Chair. Usual reports for April, May and June. In the respect of key projects, all are showing green. The bottom one, the all-weather pitch of Purd as well, that's actually now been completed. So that's a really pleasing outcome. In respect to the performance indicators, 11 of the 19 are showing green, 2 are amber, 6 are red. There's narrative against each. 3 of the red indicators relate to housing, so I'm sure Tom will be able to provide any further detail if members wish. 3 relate to leisure, 2 of those being tennis, one of which I think is been impacted by weather. And the other, I'm pleased to say that we've recently changed the way we've provided the free tennis initiative. So hopefully we'll see an uptick in figures there. But I'm happy to take any questions if members have got it.
Thank you. You've got Councillor Bullmore.
Thank you, Chair. It's not an answer that I expect you to have to hand, Lloyd, but at some point would you be able to send me the figures for Freedom Leisure's membership base of the 5,209? How many are Advanced 50 memberships? Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, yes, we can provide that following the committee.
Yeah, super, thanks.
Councillor Mace and then Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of questions, and also I just wanted to highlight on community events. I think a resident has mentioned to me how helpful and supportive Lisa Smith has been in that team with a Play Streets proposal, so I just wanted to highlight that and say thank you to that. And I'm also really pleased to see the families in bed and breakfast for over 6 weeks. The average is trending down again for that, so that's a good improvement to see. So first one was a quick question, was I attended the handover of the new pitch at Purd as well, which looks brilliant and really high quality. So really good to see that. I think there's still some installation work around things like boot scrapers outside the estate still to go in. And I also had a question about whether there's any cycle parking that's going to be installed as part of that work there.
Chair, I have replied to Councillor Mace on this privately. Alan Neve's currently off at the moment, so I can't provide the level of detail that Councillor Mace wants, but there is existing cycle parking at Purd as well to serve the leisure centre. But as soon as we've got that information, Alan will send it over to Councillor Mace.
Okay, thank you. The other question was a couple of questions for Tom. So on the performance indicator for affordable housing completions, which is one of my favourite indicators, it mentions about waiting for numbers for the urban extensions which are outside Worcester. So are those included in the 200 per year?
Through you, Chair. No, so 200. The target of 200 is within the boundary of Worcester City.
Okay, so
we do provide the narrative of the wider urban extension sites.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And on the percentage of HMO licence applications, which I know I've also asked about before, and still concerned kind of with the idea that we have to wait for all documentation before we do an inspection, because one of the things that came up in the PCC report was that victims of adult exploitation, modern slavery and human trafficking and child exploitation, one of the indicators is that people suffering from that are living in HMOs. And if we aren't doing the inspections until we have all of the documentation, I'm worried that we are not catching victims of that because we're not going in and checking the housing. So I'm just wondering, what is the reason that we can't or don't do any inspections before we have all the documentation, and what does an inspection actually include?
Yeah, I mean, as reported in this quarter, 97% of inspections were undertaken within 3 months. And of those, I don't have the figures to hand in terms of how many were completed within a shorter time scale, but we do act quite promptly in responding to those. The process that's followed is that essentially a licence is applied for through the website, and then we request supporting documentation, which we are required to undertake checks on to support that application. So it's largely a resource issue around making best use of resource. So once we receive all the information in that we need to be able to process that application, we then do the inspection. the inspection will undertake a number of checks around the property and will either grant the licence without any conditions, or if there are issues within the property that require work to be undertaken, they'll be included as conditions within the licence, and they're monitored and checked that they've been complied with. That's broadly the process that's followed.
Okay, so I understood that 97%, you know, the vast majority are done within those 3 months. I guess it's what the ones I'm worrying about are those exceptional cases where it's not being inspected because of delays of documentation being provided. Because, you know, maybe I'm wrong in the assumption, but you know, if you are going to be living in a HMO where you are a victim of those crimes, it feels like they'll be more likely the ones where they're going to be slow walking, providing documentation and delaying getting the inspections.
Okay, Councillor Mace, if you have any evidence of any of those properties that you've got suspect of trafficking or anything, I mean, those are serious issues that I'd refer those to, obviously, to officers if you highlight them, and to the police in terms of that. Obviously, we're not going to obviously catch everything that what you're saying through those inspections, and it's unfair to blame the 3% we haven't checked on potentially slipping through them. So there is a little bit of, I think, implication that because of those 3% not being them, could probably, yes, but if there's evidence that you've got, then please pass that on to officers, if that's okay. Yeah. All right. Do we have anybody else on this item? Councillor Lawrenson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. First one's about owners of homes which have been empty for over a year. So on page 11, it said that from the letter sent to those owners of a home that's been empty for over a year, we've only had a 7% response. So the question number one is, what can we do about that to get response from the other 93%?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of reasons why properties are empty. So they feature on the empty property register. We get that passed through to the private sector housing team, and then we'll contact the named owners. Lots of those individuals may be in residential care, hospital. The property may be vacant because it's going through probate. So we don't always get a response. The question probably is about how much time and resource we put into chasing responses. So we do try and contact everybody that where the property's been empty for a period of 12 months, but it's how far we go with that versus the potential impact of that additional resource that would be required to do so. So, I mean, we could keep sending letters and prompts, but we take I suppose we take a proportionate response to the benefit.
Can I ask Tom, in terms of that? Obviously, this is a key issue from our partners on the table in terms of the Green Party, in terms of empty homes. But I think we have discussed this at length in terms of the resources it takes to bring a property back in, you know, empty homes. And obviously, it does, you know, for any ordinary man out there, or woman or person looking at figures saying, look, you know, blimey, we've got this many empty homes in the city. How can we use them, get them back into use? Because they could be valuable to obviously reducing our housing waiting registers. But I think it's really important for you to clarify the amount of resources that it takes, and the effort it takes, and the money it takes in order to bring one property back, to give a comparison. And actually, is that exercise, is it feasible for us? Is it efficient for us? Is it viable in order for us to pursue a policy like that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously sending letters isn't massively resource intensive. It's where we go to pursue any enforcement around bringing a property back into use. There's a range of legislation, some which sits within the powers of private sector housing, some some within WRS, some within planning enforcement. So it does depend on the scenario and the nature of the property, whether it's having a detrimental impact on the locality, the condition of the property, and various other things that have to be considered. And the routes that can be taken will vary, but generally is a very long, protracted process and requires fairly heavy intervention by the local authorities. So if we intervene with compulsory purchase orders, that's a fairly, well, a very lengthy process to go through and to get that approved. And going through that does take significant resource from a range of areas within the council. We are in the process of undertaking a stock conditions survey that should be presented at November's committee. So within that, that will capture further information around empty homes, and we intend to use that to inform our private sector housing strategy, which will include our sort of renewed approach to tackling empty properties. So if that offers a bit more assurance around what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, that will be brought back to committee in November.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, my second question is about, relates to a housing survey. So in the same paragraph on page 11 about private sector housing, it's stated that 4 category 1 hazard notices have been issued in the quarter. Now, I've been getting a lot of grief from a resident who's worked in housing for 40 years. And whilst I don't appreciate the tone of said resident, their complaint is absolutely valid. And their complaint is that in a 2015 survey, I'm told 2,022 properties, and I shouldn't have to be told because I was a councillor then, but he's reminded me that 2,022 properties were found to have a category 1 risk in a 2015 survey, and yet no notices, category 1 notices were issued then. So, just to lead up to the question, the resident also sent me a BBC article from 4 days ago that said the proportion of private renters with children who are living in damp homes have almost doubled since the pandemic. So there are hundreds, thousands of homes that are not suitable for living in, and a comment was made by Councillor Lawrence about the impact on your well-being. The question is, have we got the willpower and the resources to issue more category 1 notices for properties that are not suitable? Because it's not about me placating our resident, it's about us doing what we can to make sure people have got livable homes. And he's absolutely bang to rights. What have I been doing for a year? But here I am raising it now. So what can we do to be more proactive, to issue those notices and make sure that landlords fix their homes so people live happier lives?
Can I, before you comment, Tom, Lloyd, can I completely sympathise, and we are 100% on your project. The Labour group, my counsel to Sarah, the Warndon councillors in Dines Green are absolutely understand this issue, know about it, and that's why over the last couple of years, and you were my vice chair last year, Neil, and you know what the amount of effort that we put in trying to improve the standards of our home, and the performance report in the last committee showed that that improvement is happening. We have not touched the surface in terms of what we can do and what we have to do in terms of improving this housing stock in terms of that. What we urge, obviously, for you to do in terms of those residents, if they haven't had the opportunity to tell us about them, then make sure you keep telling us about them. Then it's our job here in order to make sure officers are going out and inspecting those properties and serving those enforcement notices out. The team have been inundated with queries, and resources are an issue, absolutely an issue in terms of that. But we have to prioritise the HMOs. We declared a citywide HMO only last year, was it, or the year before? Only last year in terms of that. So putting that in that context, in terms of the number of new properties that we've got to investigate, there's a pile load of casework that we need to get through. So that's something that obviously Tom and Lloyd will have to be addressing. But absolutely, that shocks me as well. The case in Rotherham with that boy is Ishaq, Ishaq, in terms of that, that's heart-rending. In the 21st century, we've got kids and living in those conditions. And there are probably hundreds out there in this city that are living in that condition, that for either fear of their language barrier, for fear of repercussions from their landlords, for fear of being kicked out of their properties when properties are so sparse in terms of being found. That is a real issue, isn't it? Because people aren't coming forward, because we don't even know half of it. So we urge any of your residents that want to talk to us in confidence, pick up the phone, speak to your local councillors, speak to the council, let us know of those issues so we can follow it. Once it's on our radar, we are able then to pursue it. But without that information, we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think promotion is key, and essentially we have a statutory duty where we identify a Category 1 or Category 2 hazard to intervene. So if we're made aware of a Category 1 hazard, or we're following one of our inspections, we identify one, we'll always serve a notice. We're obliged to do so. The issue we have is residents coming forward and reporting that, and for a number of reasons, residents may not want to do that or feel comfortable or be able to. So the challenge we have is encouraging, supporting and promoting those individuals to come forward, because we do need to act on tenants' complaints. Obviously, we don't want to be intervening if that's going to be at the detriment of tenants, so we have to treat that sensitively. My plea would be around encouraging people to report any disrepair within their property, and we will go out, we will intervene, and if there's a hazard that we identify, we'll serve the relevant statutory notice to enforce it. So anything that can be done to promote that. There would be a pressure on resources, but we would respond to that and investigate those complaints. There's also reference to the extension of AWB's law. So currently that only applies to registered social housing providers, but there has been discussion around that being extended to private landlords as well. So that's yet to emerge, exactly what that will look like and how that will be regulated. But
Do you mean RSL?
it currently applies to RSLs, okay. But not to private landlords. So again, that's some further requirements that may be implied, as well as the Renters Reform Act, which is still going through Parliament at the moment.
Thank you. And in the BBC report, that Shelter, as an organisation, is lobbying for AWB's law, which is for social housing, to be replicated in private sector housing. So many people want to happen. So it's over to a Labour government to get that one sorted. Hopefully happen soon.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, did you want to speak?
Yeah, just a very quick question about empty homes. I take it we follow the same policy as Wyre Forest, where if the home is empty for a year, it becomes 200% council tax, and then the following 300% council tax.
Yeah, this council took that decision probably 2 or 3 years ago. So yeah, we follow suit.
Okay, Councillor Lawrence.
Sorry, I'm afraid it's about empty homes again. You mentioned compulsory purchase orders. Would that mean that the city itself would be buying the property, and then does it sell the property, or does it take money off to pay for its costs at that point, or do we make it as we sell it? I mean, obviously these places are probably not in a condition, a lot of them may not be in a condition to live in. Do we just then sell them to a small builder or something like that? Is it auction? I don't know.
So we would tend to use a compulsory purchase order if the reason for buying the property was regeneration-led or development-led. I'm going to get the terminology wrong, so I've not had my boots on for a while, but what we tend to use is empty management orders, something similar. In for sale, sorry. Yeah, and again, we've brought previous papers on how we use that in the past. But that's something that we can, we take the property on, we turn it around and we sell it at market value, but there's no loss to the council where we do that. The council recovers all its costs.
Okay, Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Tom, thank you very much when you and your team dealt with the young lady and her family who had experienced abuse. You were very prompt in giving her assistance, and I can report she's still thriving. The kids are very settled. and it's a much happier situation. You know, having a roof over your head and a safe place makes a huge difference to your life. So thank you for that. Can I also ask, with my Armed Forces champion hat on, have you actually had access yet to the training on housing that the Armed Forces Covenant Partnership has put together?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. I'd have to double check whether it's been delivered to all frontline housing officers, but we've been engaging as part of the Worcestershire Strategic Housing Partnership with, I've forgotten her name now, Kate LeBar, at the, around the Armed Forces Covenant, how we can further strengthen that within, across Worcestershire actually. We will be in due course undertaking a review of our allocations policy, so again another factor that we need to consider, but the allocations policies were looked at around our response to armed forces and veterans, so they are very much covered at the moment, but again we'll always look at opportunities to strengthen that moving forward.
Thank you. Can you keep me updated on that? Because the Act requires us, the Armed Forces Act requires us to address disadvantage that might have arisen as a result of their service. So, you know, that's what we're supposed to do. And housing was the big issue for the veterans that I've talked to over a number of years now, a major issue for them. So if you could keep me updated on progress, that would be great.
Thank you, Councillor Collier.
Sorry, I'm taking us from what feels like a much more important issue, but I want to talk a little bit about, I can't help but notice the reds around things to, performance indicators to do with freedom leisure. And arguably leisure activities are very important to lots of people. And looking at the number of sport and play activity participants, actually, I think if we averaged it over the last 2 years from this, Freedom Leisure would be failing to meet the targets on average of the last 2 years, 2 years of a 10-year contract, is that correct? So a fifth of the time here. I note that we have some promises of new projects, for example, the Summer Quest, which is advertised as something for the summer holidays, which I know from working with a group of parents wasn't actually quite up and running for the very start of the holidays, and it's been quite difficult for some people to access. What else do we have? What other knowledge do we have from Freedom assurances about what endeavours are being made to sort of meet these targets and make sure things are happening in a way that benefit residents of Worcester?
Again, Chair, Alan's not present this evening, so Alan will be able to provide some more context to it. What I would say is that we meet with Freedom, or Alan meets with Freedom as the sort of lead client officer, so can raise any concern from this committee about those numbers. And obviously members get a chance to scrutinise the performance of Freedom annually at this committee. But we'll certainly, we can take Councillor Collier's concerns back and lodge those into the next client contractor meeting.
Yeah, thanks. Just following up on that, Councillor Collier, I raised this exact point at the last committee meeting that we had in terms of the performance. I think the answer that we got back at that point was around the about employing the right people. I think there was an employment issue in terms of them not being able to recruit for some of the roles in there, which then affected subsequent performance. However, I haven't had an official response from Freedom in terms of the current set and what they've done in trying to address that. I heard there was some recruitment going on. Whether that then translates into figures at the next meeting is a wait to be seen, but we'll get an answer from Alan for you. So, okay, if there's any more questions, then we can note that report. All noted. Good. I haven't got any other business, so we'll move on into the closed session. Are we happy?